My husband faked his own death to start fresh with his secretary. I was grieving until the crematorium director called and said, "Ma'am, there's no body in this casket, just a note." Months later, he called terrified after realizing I'd legally inherited everything, including his mother's house where they're hiding. The phone rang at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the time because I'd been staring at the kitchen clock, counting the minutes until I could reasonably pour myself a glass of wine without feeling guilty about drinking in the afternoon. 3 weeks had passed since Michael's memorial service, and I was still moving through each day like I was underwater, everything muffled and distant. "Mrs. Patterson? This is Gerald Henderson from Peaceful Rest Crematorium." His voice carried an odd tremor that immediately put me on edge. "I need to speak with you about your husband's arrangements. Could you possibly come in today?" Something in his tone made my chest tighten. "Is there a problem with the ashes? I thought we discussed that I wasn't ready to collect them yet." "Ma'am, I think it would be better if we spoke in person. This is rather unusual." 20 minutes later, I sat across from Mr. Henderson in his sterile office, surrounded by pamphlets about grief counseling and eternal rest. He kept adjusting his tie, a nervous habit that reminded me of Michael when he was about to deliver bad news about our finances. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was thinking of my supposedly dead husband while sitting in a funeral home. "Mrs. Patterson, I've been in this business for 32 years, and I've never encountered anything quite like this." He opened a manila folder with shaking hands. "When we went to complete the cremation process for your husband, we discovered that the casket was empty. Completely empty except for this." He slid a folded piece of paper across his desk. My name was written on the outside in Michael's distinctive handwriting, the same scrawl I'd seen on grocery lists and birthday cards for 15 years. The paper felt ordinary between my fingers, but holding it felt like touching a live wire. "I don't understand," I whispered, though part of me was already beginning to comprehend something terrible. "Mrs. Patterson, there was no body in that casket. Someone placed this note where your husband should have been." My fingers trembled as I unfolded the paper. Michael's words swam before my eyes, written in the blue ink from the pen he always kept in his shirt pocket. Asterisk, "My darling Rebecca. By the time you read this, Sandra will be convinced I'm dead and buried. The grief will consume her for months, giving us the perfect cover to start over. I've already transferred the money from our joint accounts, and once Mother's house officially becomes mine through inheritance, we'll have everything we need for our new beginning. Sandra never paid attention to our finances anyway. She'll never suspect the life insurance money and property sales will fund our fresh start. Let her mourn the man she thought she knew while we build the life we deserve. Forever yours, Michael Asters." The office walls seemed to close in around me. Every word felt like a physical blow, but I forced myself to read it twice, then 3 times. Michael hadn't died in that car accident. He'd orchestrated the entire thing, planned every detail while I was making funeral arrangements and accepting casseroles from neighbors. "Mrs. Patterson, are you all right? Should I call someone?" Mr. Henderson's voice sounded distant. I was remembering the closed casket funeral, how Michael's dental partner Dr. Williams had insisted the injuries were too severe for viewing. I thought about Rebecca, his 28-year-old secretary with the practiced smile and the way she touched Michael's arm when she thought no one was looking. She'd been at the funeral, dabbing her eyes with tissues and accepting condolences about losing such a wonderful boss. "Mrs. Patterson?" "The car accident," I managed to say. "The police report mentioned extensive damage." "Yes, ma'am. The vehicle was completely destroyed. But it appears..." He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "It appears your husband wasn't in it when it crashed." The full scope of Michael's deception began crystallizing. He'd staged his own death, let me plan his funeral, watched me grieve while he hid somewhere with his secretary. Every tear I'd shed, every sleepless night, every moment of gut-wrenching loss had been orchestrated by the man I'd trusted with my life. But as the initial shock faded, something else began taking its place. Something colder and more calculating than grief. I reread the note, focusing on different details this time. Michael's casual dismissal of my intelligence. His assumption that I'd remain oblivious to our financial situation. His confidence that I'd simply accept his death and move on while he enjoyed the fruits of our 15-year marriage with another woman. He'd underestimated me completely. "Mr. Henderson, You said Mother's house would officially become his through inheritance. When did Michael's mother pass away? He consulted his files. Dorothy Patterson died 6 months ago. The estate should have been settled by now. 6 months. Michael had been planning this for at least 6 months, probably longer. While I was caring for his dying mother, bringing her soup and sitting by her bedside, he was calculating how to use her death as part of his escape plan. The betrayal cut deeper with each revelation. What happens now? I asked. Well, ma'am, we need to contact the authorities. This appears to be fraud of multiple types. Insurance fraud certainly, and possibly others. I nodded slowly, but my mind was racing in a different direction. Michael's legal death had been processed. His death certificate was already filed with the state. Social Security had been notified. Insurance companies had begun their investigations. In the eyes of the law, Michael Patterson was officially deceased. Which meant I was officially his widow. Which meant I was legally entitled to everything he owned. Including his mother's house, where I suspected he and Rebecca were currently playing house, completely unaware that their romantic hideaway now belonged to me. Mrs. Patterson? Should I contact the police? I looked up at Mr. Henderson, and for the first time in 3 weeks, I felt something other than crushing sadness. I felt the stirrings of something much more dangerous. Not just yet, I said carefully. I need some time to process this. To understand the full scope of what he's done. What I didn't tell him was that I was already beginning to understand exactly what Michael had done. And more importantly, I was beginning to understand what I was going to do about it. I folded the note and placed it in my purse. Thank you for calling me, Mr. Henderson. I'll be in touch about next steps. Walking to my car, I felt the weight of Michael's words in my purse. But instead of crushing me, that weight felt like ammunition. He'd handed me the perfect weapon against him, wrapped up in his own arrogance and sealed with his own handwriting. Michael thought he'd outsmarted everyone, especially me. He was about to learn just how wrong he could be. The morning after my crematorium revelation, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror applying mascara with steady hands. The woman looking back at me wore the same black dress I'd worn to Michael's memorial service, but something fundamental had shifted overnight. I was no longer the devastated widow everyone expected to see. I was an actress preparing for the most important performance of my life. Our family lawyer's office occupied the second floor of a Victorian building downtown, the same place where Michael and I had signed our wills 5 years earlier. Walking up those familiar stairs, I practiced my breathing, allowing just enough tremor in my voice to sound authentically fragile. Sandra, my dear, how are you holding up? Robert Caldwell had been handling our legal matters for over a decade. His concerned expression was genuine as he guided me to the leather chair across from his mahogany desk. I pulled a tissue from my purse and dabbed at my eyes. Some days are harder than others. I'm trying to be strong, but settling Michael's affairs feels so overwhelming. Of course it does. That's why I'm here to help you through this process. He opened a thick folder labeled with Michael's name. Now let's start with the immediate concerns. We need to transfer property deeds, update account ownership, and ensure you have access to everything you're entitled to as his widow. As Robert began explaining the legal procedures, I listened with the focused attention of someone memorizing a script. Every document he showed me, every account number he mentioned, every property description he read aloud was filed away in my mind like evidence in a criminal case. I had no idea Michael owned rental properties, I said, genuine surprise coloring my voice as Robert showed me deeds for 3 buildings in neighboring counties. Oh yes, he acquired these over the past few years. Quite the investor, your husband. The rental income should provide you with steady support during this difficult time. 3 properties I'd never heard of. Rental income that had never appeared in our household budget discussions. Michael had been living a financial double life, and I was only now seeing the full scope of his deception. But with each revelation I felt my strategic advantage growing stronger. And his investment accounts? I asked, maintaining my vulnerable widow act while internally cataloging every asset. Robert pulled out additional paperwork. Several accounts with different firms. He was quite diversified. Some of these show recent activity, though I'm not sure why he'd be moving money around so close to. He paused delicately. Well, before the accident. Recent activity. Money moved right before his staged death. Michael had been systematically preparing his financial escape, but in his arrogance he'd left a paper trail that now led directly to me. There's also his mother's estate to consider, Robert continued. Dorothy's house and remaining assets legally transferred to Michael 6 months ago, which means they now belong to you. I felt my pulse quicken but kept my expression appropriately mournful. Dorothy's house? I haven't been there since the funeral. It must be sitting empty. Actually, Robert frowned at his notes. The utility companies show active service at that address. Someone's been maintaining the property. Perhaps Michael arranged for a caretaker before his death. A caretaker. If only Robert knew how accurate that assessment was, though not in the way he imagined. Michael and Rebecca were indeed taking care of the property, my property. I should probably visit there soon, I said carefully. Make sure everything's secure. Excellent idea. In fact, I'll need to update all the property deeds to reflect your ownership. Standard procedure after a spouse's death. Over the next 2 hours, Robert walked me through the complete inventory of Michael's assets. With each document signed and each deed transferred, I felt the balance of power shifting further in my direction. Michael's carefully planned escape had inadvertently handed me control of his entire financial world. There's one more thing, Robert said, pulling out a final folder. Michael's life insurance policy. The insurance company will need to complete their investigation before releasing funds, but as his beneficiary, you should be aware of the process. Life insurance. Another piece of Michael's puzzle falling into place. He'd counted on that money being part of his fresh start with Rebecca, never imagining it would instead fund my response to his betrayal. Leaving Robert's office, I felt the weight of knowledge settling around me like armor. Michael owned far more than I'd realized, and now it was all legally mine. But I needed more information about his current situation before making my next move. My first stop was the dental office where Rebecca had worked. Dr. Williams, Michael's partner, greeted me with the same sympathetic expression I'd grown accustomed to seeing. Sandra, how thoughtful of you to stop by. We're all still processing Michael's loss. I wanted to thank Rebecca personally for her support during this difficult time, I said, noting how Dr. Williams's expression shifted slightly. Is she in today? Actually, Rebecca requested extended leave. She said losing Michael was particularly difficult for her, given how closely they worked together. He paused, choosing his words carefully. She mentioned needing time to process everything. Processing everything. What a delicate way to describe celebrating your lover's successful fake death while publicly mourning his supposed demise. Do you know when she might return? I'd love to send her a note. I'm not certain. She said she might not come back at all, that too many memories here would make it hard to move forward. Too many memories of conducting an affair with her boss, no doubt. Rebecca had burned her bridges at the dental office. Another indication that she and Michael were confident their new life was permanent. That afternoon, I drove past Dorothy's house for the first time since her funeral. The modest 2-story home sat on a quiet street lined with oak trees, looking perfectly normal from the outside. But knowing what I now knew, every detail took on new significance. Fresh tire tracks in the driveway. Curtains that hadn't been there during Dorothy's final months. A small garden that someone had been tending. Michael and Rebecca had made themselves at home in his dead mother's house, completely unaware that I now owned every square inch of their romantic hideaway. Sitting in my car across the street, I watched for signs of movement. A shadow passed by an upstairs window. Someone was definitely living there, probably believing they were safe and undetected in their perfect refuge. I smiled for the first time since discovering Michael's betrayal. They thought they were hidden, protected, and financially secure. They had no idea that their sanctuary had become my property, that their refuge was now my weapon, and that their perfect plan had handed me everything I needed to destroy the new life they thought they'd built. The Grieving Widow Act had served its purpose. Now it was time to begin the real performance. The next morning I called Secure Home Solutions, a local company with excellent reviews and a reputation for discretion. When the receptionist asked about my security needs, I practiced the weary tone I'd perfected over the past few days. I recently inherited my mother-in-law's house after losing my husband, and I need to secure the property. There have been some concerns about break-ins in the neighborhood. Of course, ma'am. We can schedule an assessment for tomorrow afternoon. Will you be meeting our technicians there? Actually, I'd prefer if you could handle it independently. I'm still struggling with visiting places that hold so many memories. I paused for effect. Just change all the locks and install a comprehensive security system. I'll need remote access so I can monitor the property from home. Within 24 hours, I had complete surveillance coverage of Dorothy's house and every key to every door. The installation team had worked efficiently during the afternoon hours when, based on my earlier observation, Michael and Rebecca typically went out for groceries or errands. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened the security app on my phone. The house appeared quiet until around 8:30, when headlights swept across the front camera. A small blue sedan pulled into the driveway, Rebecca's car, according to my research at the dental office. I watched with fascination as Michael approached the front door, key in hand. He inserted it, turned it, and nothing happened. He tried again, jiggling the handle with increasing frustration. Rebecca joined him, and I could see their animated conversation through the camera's night vision, though I couldn't hear their words. They moved to the back door, then to windows, testing each one systematically. Michael's body language grew more agitated with each failed attempt. Finally, Rebecca pulled out her phone, probably calling a locksmith, while Michael stood with his hands on his hips, staring at the house that had suddenly become a fortress against him. The irony was delicious. Michael was locked out of his own mother's house by his supposedly grieving widow, and he had no legal recourse to complain about it. The following week, I began phase 2 of my plan. I called the city's building inspection department, explaining that I'd inherited property and wanted to ensure everything was up to code before deciding whether to rent or sell. We'll need to schedule electrical, plumbing, and structural inspections, the clerk explained. Can we access the property on Thursday morning? Absolutely. I believe there might be someone checking on the house occasionally, possibly a neighbor with a spare key. If anyone's there, just explain that these are routine inspections ordered by the new owner. Thursday morning brought the first real test of my strategy. Through the security cameras, I watched as Michael and Rebecca scrambled when the doorbell rang at 9 a.m. sharp. The electrical inspector stood patiently on the front porch while chaos erupted inside. Rebecca grabbed clothing and personal items, shoving them into bags. Michael frantically covered evidence of their habitation: dishes, medications, anything that might indicate recent occupancy. They escaped through the back door just as the inspector began walking around the house's perimeter. For 20 minutes, I watched them huddled behind the garden shed, waiting for the official visit to end. Rebecca looked close to tears, while Michael kept checking his phone obsessively. The plumbing inspector arrived Friday, followed by a structural engineer on Monday. Each visit sent them into the same frantic routine of hiding evidence and sneaking out back doors. Their romantic hideaway was becoming a source of constant stress and paranoia. But my masterstroke came when I contacted Dorothy's utility companies. I'm settling my mother-in-law's estate and need to update service arrangements, I explained to each customer service representative. Dorothy Patterson passed away 6 months ago, and her son Michael died recently in an accident. I'm the surviving daughter-in-law, and I need to suspend services until I decide what to do with the property. I'm sorry for your losses, ma'am. We can suspend service immediately. Thank you. I appreciate your understanding during this difficult time. By Wednesday afternoon, Dorothy's house had no electricity, water, or gas. Through my security cameras, I watched Michael flip light switches repeatedly, his confusion evident even in the grainy footage. Rebecca tried the kitchen faucet, then the bathroom taps, growing more agitated with each failed attempt. That evening, they lit candles and used flashlights, their romantic sanctuary transformed into a survival situation. I observed Michael on his phone, probably calling utility companies and being told that service had been suspended at the property owner's request. The property owner. Me. Friday morning, I contacted Margaret Thornton, the most successful real estate agent in town. Her aggressive marketing style and large network of potential buyers made her perfect for my purposes. I have an inherited property I need to sell quickly, I explained during our phone consultation. It's a lovely 2-story home, but I can't bear to keep it after losing both my husband and mother-in-law recently. I completely understand, dear. Grief can make certain places feel overwhelming. I'll have the listing active by Monday and can start showing it immediately. That would be wonderful. I trust your judgment completely on pricing and showings. The for sale sign appeared Tuesday morning, a bright red beacon visible from every window of Dorothy's house. Through my cameras, I watched Michael discover it during what appeared to be an early morning reconnaissance of the neighborhood. He stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring at the sign as if it might disappear if he looked long enough. His phone call that afternoon was frantic, judging by his pacing and gestures. Rebecca joined him in the living room, and their conversation grew increasingly animated. She pointed toward the front yard where the sign stood, then threw her hands up in apparent exasperation. By Thursday, Margaret had scheduled the first showing. I watched a young couple tour the house with obvious interest, completely unaware that the home's illegal occupants were hiding in the basement utility room. The showing lasted 45 minutes, during which Michael and Rebecca remained cramped in their hiding space, probably terrified of making any noise that might reveal their presence. More showings followed throughout the week. Each one forced them into increasingly creative hiding spots and longer periods of uncomfortable concealment. Their dream house was becoming a nightmare of constant vigilance and fear. Through it all, I maintained my perfect widow performance for the outside world while privately relishing every moment of their growing desperation. The security cameras had become my entertainment system, showing me a real-time documentary of Michael's carefully planned life crumbling into chaos. He'd wanted to make me feel helpless and abandoned. Instead, he'd made himself a prisoner in his own supposed refuge, while I held every key to his freedom. The tables hadn't just turned, they'd been completely rebuilt with me as the architect. The psychological warfare escalated when I made my first call to the county code enforcement office. I discovered that as a property owner dealing with unauthorized occupancy, I had several legal avenues to create pressure without directly confronting the situation myself. "I'm concerned about my inherited property," I explained to Officer Martinez, a sympathetic woman who'd handled similar cases. "I think someone might be living there illegally and I'm worried about liability issues. Have you observed evidence of occupancy? Strange patterns with garbage pickup, lights on at odd hours, and neighbors have mentioned seeing people coming and going. As the property owner, I need this documented officially." Officer Martinez scheduled an inspection for the following Tuesday. Through my security cameras, I watched her arrive precisely at 10 a.m., clipboard in hand. When she knocked on the front door, I could see Michael and Rebecca's panicked scramble through the interior cameras I'd had installed. They'd become experts at their disappearing act, but this time was different. Officer Martinez wasn't just checking the property and leaving, she was conducting a thorough investigation. She walked the perimeter, noting evidence of habitation: recent tire tracks, fresh cigarette butts, a small vegetable garden that someone had been tending. Most damaging was the garbage situation. Rebecca had been putting out trash regularly, but using Dorothy's old address labels. Officer Martinez photographed everything, creating an official record of unauthorized occupancy. The violation notice that appeared on the front door 2 days later was just the beginning. I'd also contacted the health department, expressing concerns about potential unsanitary conditions in an unoccupied property. "Sometimes squatters create health hazards," I explained to the inspector. "I want to ensure the property is safe before I decide whether to rent or sell." These official visits created a pattern of constant intrusion that transformed their sanctuary into a source of perpetual anxiety. Every knock on the door could be another inspector, another violation, another step closer to discovery. But my most devastating move was financial. Michael's death certificate had been processed through every relevant agency, and I began systematically using it to dismantle his economic foundation. I started with his credit cards. Each company's bereavement department was sympathetic and efficient when I called to report the cardholder's death. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Patterson. We'll cancel all cards immediately and settle the account through estate procedures." His bank accounts followed the same pattern. As his legal widow, I provided death certificates and transferred everything into estate management under my control. Michael's checking account, his savings, even the small account he'd maintained for business expenses, all of it became mine to manage. The cellular phone company was particularly satisfying to contact. "Mr. Patterson's line will be terminated immediately," the customer service representative confirmed. "Any remaining balance will be settled through the estate." I imagined Michael trying to make calls and discovering his phone had been deactivated. No way to contact utility companies, no way to arrange new services, no way to maintain the digital connections that modern life required. Every financial thread that Michael had counted on for his new life was systematically cut. He'd planned to access their joint accounts, use his credit cards, maintain his normal spending patterns while officially being dead. Instead, he found himself completely cut off from the economic foundation he'd built over 15 years of marriage. Through my property management research, I discovered that Rebecca had been calling utility companies from Dorothy's landline, trying to restore services. The phone records, available to me as the property owner investigating unauthorized usage, revealed increasingly desperate conversations. She tried to set up new accounts under her name, but without established credit history at that address and with mounting questions about her relationship to the property, these attempts repeatedly failed. Utility companies had become suspicious of the irregular requests and conflicting information they were receiving. Michael's attempts were even more revealing. Using borrowed phones and false names, he tried to restore services by claiming to be Dorothy's nephew or a property caretaker. These lies unraveled quickly when utility companies cross-referenced their information with official property ownership records that showed me as the sole legal owner. My confidence grew with each successful maneuver. The same attention to detail that had made me an effective household manager was now being channeled into strategic warfare. I maintained detailed spreadsheets tracking every action I'd taken, every agency I'd contacted, every pressure point I'd activated. The woman Michael had dismissed as a passive, dependent wife was revealing capabilities he'd never bothered to notice. I'd always handled our household logistics, managed our social calendar, coordinated repairs and services, skills that translated perfectly into coordinating his systematic isolation. Sleep came easier now than it had in months. Instead of lying awake replaying moments of betrayal, I spent my evenings planning the next day's moves. The grief that had once consumed me had transformed into focused energy directed toward a clear goal. Meanwhile, our small town's natural tendency toward gossip was working in my favor. I'd mentioned my squatter problem to a few key neighbors, who'd naturally shared the information with others. Dorothy's house, once invisible in its suburban normalcy, had become a focal point of community attention. Mrs. Chun from next door began walking her dog past the house twice daily, noting license plates and activity patterns. The mailman, Charlie, started paying closer attention to delivery requests and suspicious mail forwarding attempts. Even teenage neighbors began treating the house as entertainment, occasionally gathering across the street to see if they could spot the mysterious unauthorized occupants. Michael and Rebecca's every movement was being observed by an informal neighborhood watch network that had formed around my property concerns. Their isolation was becoming complete, trapped inside a house they couldn't legally occupy, surrounded by a community that was actively monitoring their presence, cut off from financial resources, and facing mounting official pressure from multiple government agencies. The psychological pressure was working exactly as I'd intended. Through my security cameras, I could see the toll it was taking. Their conversations appeared more strained, their movements more paranoid, their entire existence reduced to hiding and surviving rather than enjoying their supposed romantic escape. Michael had wanted to start fresh. Instead, he was discovering what it meant to have no foundation at all. The call came at 7:23 p.m. on a Thursday evening, 3 months and 2 days after Mr. Henderson's revelation at the crematorium. I was in my kitchen preparing dinner when my phone rang with an unknown number. Something about the timing and the unfamiliar digits made my pulse quicken before I even answered. Sandra, please don't hang up. Michael's voice hit me like ice water. After months of watching him through security cameras, hearing his actual words felt surreal. He sounded older, strained, with an edge of panic I'd never heard during our 15 years of marriage. "Who is this?" I asked, though we both knew the charade was pointless. It's me. We need to talk. There are some complications with Mother's house, and I think there's been a misunderstanding. Complications. Misunderstanding. The careful language of a man trying to discuss his fake death without actually admitting to fraud over a phone line that might be recorded. "I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong number. My husband is dead. Sandra, please. I know this is confusing, but there are things about the accident that didn't happen the way people think. I can explain everything if you'll just listen." I let him talk, settling into my kitchen chair with the satisfaction of a chess player watching an opponent realize they're in checkmate. His voice carried the desperate energy of someone who'd run out of options and was grasping for any lifeline. The house. Mother's house. There's been a mistake with the utilities. And there's a for sale sign that shouldn't be there. Someone's been scheduling inspections and causing problems for the people who are supposed to be taking care of the property. The people taking care of the property. Even now, in his desperation, Michael couldn't bring himself to admit what he'd done. I don't know what you're talking about, I said calmly. I inherited that house when my husband died. As the legal owner, I have every right to maintain it however I see fit. But you don't understand, there are people there who were helping me with arrangements. Before the accident. They can't just be thrown out without notice. Arrangements for what? The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. Finally, his voice came back smaller and more defeated. Xander, please. Whatever you think you know about what happened, we can work this out. But you have to stop the sale and turn the utilities back on. These people are in a very difficult situation. That's when I decided to end his misery of uncertainty. Michael, I know exactly what happened. I know about your fake death. I know about Rebecca. I know about the note you left in the casket promising her a fresh start funded by my grief. And I know you're both living illegally in my house. The house I inherited when you legally died. The silence this time was profound. I could picture his face, that particular expression he got when one of his schemes unraveled in ways he hadn't anticipated. How did you? The crematorium director called me 3 months ago. Your love letter to Rebecca was quite informative. Did you really think you could orchestrate your own death and I'd just play the grieving widow forever? Sandra, listen to me carefully. This isn't what you think. Rebecca and I are squatting in my house without permission while you're legally dead and she's unemployed. I know exactly what this is, Michael. What I don't think you understand is what I've done about it. I began listing everything methodically. The security cameras, the canceled utilities, the closed bank accounts, the terminated credit cards, the code enforcement violations, the health department inspections, the real estate listing. Every account you thought you could access, closed. Every credit card you planned to use, canceled due to cardholder death. Your phone plan, terminated. Your mother's house, mine legally and currently listed for sale. Your rental properties, also mine. Your investment accounts, transferred to my control as your widow. With each item I mentioned, his breathing grew more labored. By the time I finished, he was audibly hyperventilating. You can't do this. Those accounts, those properties, half of that is mine. You're dead, Michael. Dead people don't own property. Dead people don't have rights. You made sure of that when you filed your own death certificate. This is insane. You're destroying everything we built together. No, you destroyed it when you decided to fake your death and steal our assets to fund your affair. I'm just making sure you stay dead. That's when I heard Rebecca's voice in the background, sharp with panic. She'd clearly been listening to his side of the conversation. What does she mean we can't access the accounts? You said we had money saved. Rebecca, not now. You said your mother left you money. You said we'd be financially secure. Their argument escalated quickly. 3 months of pressure and isolation had apparently frayed their relationship to the breaking point. Rebecca's voice grew louder and more accusatory as the reality of their situation crystallized. You told me she was stupid. You said she'd never figure out how to manage money or property. You said she'd be too grief-stricken to pay attention. She was supposed to be. Michael's admission hung in the air between us. Even in his desperation, his fundamental disrespect for my intelligence remained unchanged. Here's what's going to happen, I said, cutting through their argument. You have 48 hours to remove yourselves and all your belongings from my property. After that, I'm calling the police to report trespassers. Sandra, you don't understand what you're asking. We have nowhere else to go. Rebecca lost her job and I can't. You can't what? Get a job? Open a bank account? Rent an apartment? Of course you can't. You're legally dead. You made yourself a ghost, Michael, and ghosts don't get to live in the real world. The power in my voice surprised even me. 4 months, I'd been operating behind the scenes, pulling strings and manipulating circumstances. Now, speaking directly to the man who'd betrayed me, I felt the full scope of my control. You wanted to start fresh? Congratulations. You can start with absolutely nothing, just like you left me with. The difference is I'm still legally alive. What about Rebecca? She didn't know about the fake death until after. Rebecca knew she was having an affair with a married man. Whatever other lies you told her are between you two. My concern is getting squatters out of my house. I hung up on his protests, my hands surprisingly steady as I set the phone down. Outside my kitchen window, the evening light was fading, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was stepping into brightness rather than darkness. The tables had completely turned, and Michael was finally learning what it felt like to be powerless in the face of someone else's calculated decisions. The security footage from Friday night was everything I'd hoped to see. At 2:17 a.m., headlights swept across Dorothy's driveway as Rebecca's small sedan pulled up to the house one final time. Through the night vision cameras, I watched Michael and Rebecca move like shadows, loading their belongings with the desperate efficiency of people who knew they were running out of time. They had so little to pack. 3 months of hiding had reduced their grand romantic escape to a few suitcases and garbage bags. Michael carried a box that looked like it contained his electronics, while Rebecca struggled with what appeared to be her clothing and personal items. The contrast with their confident arrival months earlier was stark. Then they'd been moving into what they thought was their secret palace, now they were fleeing like refugees. I watched Michael take one last look at the house before getting into the passenger seat. Even through the grainy security footage, his body language conveyed defeat. Rebecca drove, her posture rigid with what I assumed was anger and disillusionment. They disappeared into the night at 2:43 a.m. and I never saw them again. The silence that followed felt profound. 4 months, those cameras had shown me glimpses of their declining situation. Their arguments, their anxiety, their mounting desperation. Now the screens showed empty rooms and still hallways. Dorothy's house was finally mine without the complication of unwanted occupants. But more than the physical space, I'd reclaimed something much more valuable: my sense of self. The woman who discovered Michael's betrayal 4 months earlier had been devastated, lost, completely unprepared for the reality of his calculated cruelty. The woman who'd watched him flee into the night was someone entirely different. I discovered capabilities I never knew I possessed: strategic thinking, financial acumen, psychological warfare skills that would have seemed impossible during my years as Michael's conventional wife. His betrayal had inadvertently freed me from limitations I hadn't even realized existed. For 15 years I'd been the supportive spouse, the capable household manager, the woman who handled details while her husband made the important decisions. Michael's fake death had forced me to become the decision-maker, and I discovered I was remarkably good at it. The transformation didn't go unnoticed. Within weeks of the squatter situation being resolved, neighbors began approaching me with genuine admiration. "Sandra, the way you've handled everything is just remarkable," Mrs. Chin told me during a chance encounter at the grocery store. "Managing inherited property while dealing with grief. And you solved that whole problem so efficiently. Most people would have just called the police immediately," added Tom Morrison from down the street. "But you handled it through proper legal channels, documented everything correctly. Very impressive." The respect in their voices felt different from the polite sympathy I'd received as Michael's widow. This was recognition of my competence, my intelligence, my ability to handle complex problems independently. People saw me as formidable now, not fragile. The real estate agent, Margaret Thornton, was particularly vocal about my capabilities when she called to discuss removing the house from the market. "I have to say, Sandra, your approach to the unauthorized occupancy situation was masterful. You created documented legal pressure while maintaining complete professional distance. I've seen property owners get emotional and make mistakes, but you handled everything perfectly. I decided to keep Dorothy's house rather than sell it. The decision surprised even me initially, but the more I considered it, the more symbolically important it became. This was the place where Michael had thought he'd found sanctuary with his lover, where he'd planned to enjoy the fruits of his betrayal. Instead, it would generate rental income that would fund my new independence. The renovation took 6 weeks and transformed the house completely. I removed every trace of Michael and Rebecca's occupancy: new paint, new flooring, updated fixtures, fresh landscaping. The master bedroom where they'd shared their stolen romance became a bright, airy space with no connection to their deception. The kitchen where they'd played house was modernized with clean lines and neutral colors. By the time I finished, Dorothy's house looked better than it had in decades. The first tenant, a young teacher named Emily, fell in love with it immediately. The rental income alone would be enough to support my comfortable lifestyle, but it was the psychological satisfaction that mattered most. Every month when Emily's rent payment arrived, I was reminded that Michael's supposed refuge had become my financial foundation. The place where he'd thought he was safe from the consequences of his actions was now generating the means for my continued independence from him. Looking back 6 months later, I realized that my methodical approach had been far more satisfying than immediate justice would have been. Simply calling the police that first day would have resulted in arrests and prosecutions, but it wouldn't have given Michael the extended experience of powerlessness that he'd inflicted on me. Instead, he'd lived for months with the same uncertainty and fear I'd experienced after discovering his betrayal. He'd learned what it meant to have no control over his circumstances, no resources to fall back on, no safety net to catch him when everything collapsed. Most importantly, he discovered that the woman he'd dismissed as helpless was actually capable of systematically dismantling his entire world. The revenge was complete, but it had become about more than just payback. Through the process of reclaiming my power, I discovered who I really was beneath 15 years of being Mrs. Michael Patterson. I was stronger, smarter, and more capable than either of us had ever imagined. Michael had wanted to kill his old life and start fresh. In the end, he'd succeeded, but I was the one who'd been reborn. He was somewhere out there living as a ghost of his former self, while I was finally living as my truest self. The woman he'd tried to destroy had become more powerful than the woman he'd married. That seemed like the most perfect justice of all. If this story of calculated revenge had you completely hooked, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when Sandra calmly revealed she knew everything during that terrified phone call, watching Michael's world crumble in real time. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more jaw-dropping stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.
I'm Allison Cooper, 34, and I'm a software engineer with a secret that only a few people know. My 15-year-old Toyota Corolla has been the subject of countless family jokes, especially from my younger brother Ryan. He works in finance and cares deeply about appearances. Last month, tensions about my embarrassing car reached a breaking point at our parents' anniversary party. What Ryan didn't know then was why I chose to live modestly despite my success. If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love connecting with all of you from around the world. Growing up in suburban Boston, our family was solidly middle class. My parents, James and Catherine Cooper, worked incredibly hard to give Ryan and me a comfortable life. Dad was an accountant who spent 40 years at the same firm, while Mom taught second grade at the local elementary school. They instilled in us the values of hard work, education, and living within your means. Money doesn't grow on trees, Dad would always say whenever we asked for something expensive. Even as children, Ryan and I were different. While I was pragmatic and studious, preferring to spend weekends reading books or tinkering with my computer, Ryan was social and status-conscious from a young age. He wanted the brand name clothes his friends wore and worried about fitting in. I remember when he was 13, he begged our parents for a pair of $200 sneakers because everyone at school has them. Meanwhile, I was happy with my thrift store finds and library books. Our parents loved us both equally, but I sometimes noticed their eyes shining with extra pride when Ryan brought home popular friends or won student council elections. My achievements, math competitions, coding projects on a roll, earned quiet nods of approval. They were proud, but it wasn't the kind of success they could easily brag about at neighborhood barbecues. I discovered my passion for computers when I was 11 after Dad brought home our first family PC. While Ryan used it to play games, I wanted to know how it worked. By 14, I was teaching myself basic programming languages from library books. My high school guidance counselor recognized my aptitude and helped me apply for scholarships. I ended up attending our state university on a full academic scholarship, studying computer science. Ryan, on the other hand, was determined to attend Dartmouth, even though it meant our parents had to take out a second mortgage on their home. While I lived frugally in a shared apartment with 3 roommates, Ryan joined a fraternity and spent summers interning at prestigious firms in New York. After graduation, I took a job at a small but promising tech startup in Boston. The salary wasn't impressive, but I negotiated for equity instead, a decision that would later prove pivotal. I worked 60-hour weeks, learning everything I could while building my skills and reputation. Meanwhile, Ryan landed a position at a top investment bank in New York, immediately making twice my salary. At family gatherings, he'd talk about client dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants and the apartment he was renting in Manhattan. "Allison's still figuring things out," my mother would say apologetically when relatives asked about my more modest career path. I didn't bother explaining that I was actually advancing quickly or that I believed in the company's potential. I just smiled and passed the mashed potatoes. As the years passed, our different approaches to life became more pronounced. Ryan moved up quickly in the finance world, each promotion bringing a larger salary, a more expensive watch, and eventually, luxury cars. He dated women who matched his lifestyle, beautiful, polished, and equally focused on appearances. When he brought his girlfriend Summer to Christmas 3 years ago, she arrived wearing diamond earrings and carrying a handbag that cost more than my monthly rent. I continued working in tech, moving from that first startup, which was eventually acquired, turning my equity into my first significant windfall, to another promising company. I lived comfortably but modestly in a small townhouse I purchased in a developing neighborhood. I invested my money carefully rather than spending it on visible luxuries. When I did splurge, it was on things nobody in my family would see or understand the value of. Our family holidays followed a predictable pattern. Ryan would arrive last, making a grand entrance with stories about celebrities he'd met or exclusive events he'd attended. Summer would compliment our mother's home while subtly suggesting improvements. I'd help in the kitchen, listen to everyone's stories, and deflect questions about my dating life or career with vague answers. "Don't you want to move to a nicer area?" my mother would ask, concerned about my neighborhood. "You could afford better clothes with your job, couldn't you?" my father would wonder, not understanding why I wore the same sweater year after year. I never explained that my net worth was growing steadily or that I preferred to allocate my resources differently. It was easier to be underestimated, to fly under the radar while making decisions that felt right to me. Besides, I'd long ago accepted that Ryan would always be the family star, and that was fine with me. I loved my brother despite his flaws, and I understood that his need for external validation came from a place of insecurity I didn't share. What I didn't realize was how much my choices, particularly my car, had become a source of genuine embarrassment for him. That realization was about to hit home in a way neither of us expected. My 2008 Toyota Corolla isn't much to look at. The silver paint has dulled over the years, there's a small dent in the passenger door from a supermarket parking lot incident, and the fabric seats have seen better days. But mechanically, it's sound. I've maintained it meticulously, never missing an oil change or scheduled service. With 187,000 miles on the odometer, it still runs perfectly and gets excellent gas mileage. I bought it used when I landed my first job out of college. Back then, it was already 7 years old but in good condition. I paid cash $12,000 that represented most of my savings at the time. Every month that I didn't have a car payment felt like a victory, especially when I was putting every spare dollar into investments and building my emergency fund. As the years passed and my financial situation improved dramatically, friends and colleagues occasionally asked why I didn't upgrade. The reasons were simple. The car was paid off, inexpensive to maintain, and reliable. I also had environmental concerns about the waste of perfectly good vehicles being discarded for newer models. Besides, driving an unassuming car had unexpected benefits. No one tried to break into it, parking lot dings didn't cause stress, and I never worried about where I parked it. Ryan, however, viewed my car very differently. His automotive journey began with a BMW 3 Series the moment he received his first substantial bonus. 2 years later, he upgraded to a Mercedes S-Class, and most recently, he'd acquired a Porsche 911. Each vehicle was more expensive than the last, and each became part of his carefully cultivated image. When Ryan visited Boston, he insisted on driving whenever we went anywhere together. "Let's take my car," he'd say, dangling his keys before I could even offer mine. At family gatherings, he'd park prominently in the driveway while I tucked my Toyota discreetly along the street. The comments started subtly. "Don't you think it's time for something new, Allison?" my father would ask, eyeing my car with concern. "I know someone who could give you a great deal on a lease," Ryan would offer, not for the first time. "You must be doing well enough now to afford at least a new Honda," my mother would suggest. I'd smile and change the subject, not wanting to explain my financial philosophy or reveal how well I was actually doing. It seemed easier that way. Ryan's girlfriend Summer joined the chorus after they'd been dating for a year. "I would just die if I had to drive something so basic," she said during one family dinner, her voice dripping with pity that wasn't entirely sincere. Ryan nodded in agreement. "Image matters in the business world, Ali. People judge you by these things whether you like it or not." I took a sip of wine and said nothing, though inside I was thinking about the difference between assets and liabilities, and how Ryan's expensive cars lost thousands in value the moment he drove them off the lot. The situation escalated last Thanksgiving. After dinner at an upscale restaurant Ryan had selected and insisted on paying for, my car wouldn't start. The battery had died, an easy fix, but not at 9 o'clock on a holiday evening. Ryan was visibly mortified as other diners exited the restaurant, passing by where he stood in his tailored suit next to my stranded Toyota. He quickly ushered Summer into his Porsche. "I'll drive you home," he said to me, his voice tight. "We can deal with this thing tomorrow." During the drive to my townhouse, he couldn't contain himself any longer. "Allison, this is exactly what I've been talking about. That car isn't just old, it's becoming a liability. What if you've been alone tonight? Or in a bad area? And frankly, it reflects on the whole family." The valet actually asked me if my sister was having financial problems. I stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. "The car is fine, Ryan. It just needed a new battery." "It's not fine. You're a professional woman in your 30s. You should be representing yourself and our family better than this." His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "People make assumptions based on what you drive. That's just reality." "I don't particularly care what the valet thinks about my financial situation," I replied calmly. "Well, maybe you should start caring what people think," he snapped. "Perception creates reality in this world." We rode the rest of the way in silence. As I got out at my townhouse, he added, "Just promise me you'll think about an upgrade. I can help with recommendations, financing, whatever you need." I thanked him for the ride and said goodnight, closing the door on his concerned expression. Inside my modest home, I kicked off my shoes and padded down the hallway to my home office. I opened my investment portfolio on my computer and smiled at the numbers on the screen. If Ryan only knew. But I had my reasons for keeping my financial situation private, and for now, I was content to let my family continue their assumptions. Little did I know that events were about to force my hand in ways I hadn't anticipated. My parents' 35th wedding anniversary arrived on a perfect June evening. Ryan had taken charge of organizing the celebration, booking a private room at the Westbrook Country Club, the same venue where he was hoping to host his own wedding to Summer once he proposed. He'd invited not only our extended family, but also a carefully curated selection of his colleagues and Summer's family members. 2 days before the event, Ryan texted me, "Dress code is formal. Also, might be easier to Uber to the club? Parking will be tight with 60 guests." I read between the lines immediately. He didn't want my Toyota in the parking lot amid the luxury vehicles his friends would be driving. I considered acquiescing to keep the peace, but something in me rebelled at the request. This was our parents' anniversary, a family celebration, and I refused to be ashamed of my choices. The evening of the party, I arrived at the country club in my Corolla, pulling up to the valet stand behind a gleaming Audi. The young valet took the Audi keys with a deferential nod, then turned to me with a slightly different expression as I stepped out in my navy blue cocktail dress. I handed him my keys with a friendly smile and watched as he tried to hide his surprise at being asked to park such an ordinary vehicle. As I turned toward the entrance, I spotted Ryan standing on the steps with Summer and another couple I recognized as his friends from work. He was mid-conversation when he noticed my car being driven away by the valet. The smile froze on his face. "You made it," he said as I approached, kissing my cheek stiffly. "I thought you might use a rideshare." "The Toyota's running fine," I replied cheerfully, nodding hello to the others. Ryan pulled me aside as Summer engaged the other couple in conversation. "I specifically suggested you not bring that car," he hissed under his breath. "It's transportation, Ryan. It gets me from point A to point B safely." His face flushed with anger. "I have the managing partner of my firm here tonight. Summer's parents are here. Do you have any idea how it looks when my sister shows up in a car that's probably worth less than the watch I'm wearing?" I felt a flash of hurt, but kept my expression neutral. "I think it looks like your sister has different priorities than you do. Stop embarrassing us with your cheap car," he said, his voice low but intense. "Mom and Dad deserve better than you making a statement with your financial eccentricity on their special night." Summer glanced over, clearly noting the tension between us. She approached with a practiced smile. "Everything okay?" she asked, slipping her arm through Ryan's. "Fine," Ryan said, composing himself. Allison was just explaining her transportation choices. Summer gave my shoulder a patronizing squeeze. "You know, my cousin works at the BMW dealership. He could get you such a deal on a lease. Something entry-level would be so much better than what you're driving now." I thanked her for her concern and excused myself to find our parents, my face burning despite my attempt at composure. The dinner that followed was beautiful but tense. I was seated at a table with our aunt and uncle and some family friends, away from Ryan's prominent position near our parents with Summer and his professional associates. Throughout the evening, I noticed him charming everyone, moving confidently between tables, the perfect host and devoted son. During his toast to our parents, he spoke eloquently about family values and legacy. "Mom and Dad taught us the importance of presenting our best selves to the world," he said, raising his glass. "They showed us that how you conduct yourself matters, that excellence isn't just what you achieve, but how you represent yourself and your family along the way." He didn't look at me, but I felt the implied criticism nonetheless. Later, as dessert was being served, Ryan led an impromptu discussion at his table about investment strategies that was loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "The problem with financial literacy in this country," he announced, "is that people don't understand the concept of appropriate allocation. They either hoard money uselessly or waste it entirely. Neither approach builds genuine wealth or reflects success." Several of his colleagues nodded appreciatively at his insight while Summer looked on adoringly. I focused on my chocolate mousse, trying to ignore the conversation until I heard my name. "Allison here," Ryan said, gesturing toward me with his wine glass, "is my brilliant big sister who works in tech. But she's a perfect example of someone who could benefit from some image consulting. Brilliant with code, but driving a car that's older than some of the wait staff tonight." Nervous laughter rippled through his end of the room. Our mother looked uncomfortable, while our father frowned slightly. Something in me snapped. I'd endured years of subtle digs about my lifestyle choices without revealing my reasons or results. I'd allowed my brother to believe I was financially naive because it seemed easier than confrontation. But using me as the punchline of a joke at our parents' anniversary celebration crossed a line. I set down my dessert spoon carefully. "Not everyone measures success the same way, Ryan," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet room. "Some of us prefer substance over show. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I'll get some air." I stood and walked calmly from the room, feeling dozens of eyes on my back. Outside on the terrace, I took deep breaths of the warm summer air, trying to steady my emotions. I wasn't angry at Ryan, not really. I was sad about the distance between us, how little he actually knew me despite being my brother. Our mother found me there 10 minutes later. "Ryan didn't mean anything by it," she said, her automatic defense of my brother as predictable as it was well-intentioned. "I know, Mom," I replied, giving her a reassuring smile. "Enjoy your party. This is your night, not about Ryan and me." I stayed another hour, making pleasant conversation and helping my parents open their anniversary gifts. When I said my goodbyes, Ryan was deep in conversation with Summer's father and barely acknowledged my departure. Driving home alone in my Toyota, the tears I'd been holding back finally came. I wasn't crying because I felt judged, I was crying because the people who should have known me best had such a fundamentally wrong impression of who I was and what I valued. And I wasn't sure if I was ready to correct them, or if it would even matter if I did. 2 weeks after the anniversary party, my phone rang early on a Tuesday morning. I was already at my desk in my home office, coffee in hand, responding to emails from our development team on the East Coast. Allison. Ryan's voice sounded stressed. I need a favor. Good morning to you too, I replied, surprised to hear from him after how we'd left things. Sorry, yes, good morning. He cleared his throat. Look, I'm in a bind. My car won't start, something electrical, and the dealership can't send a tow truck until this afternoon. I have a critical meeting with potential investors at 11, and I can't reschedule. Could you possibly give me a ride? I know it's last minute, and things have been tense between us, but I'm desperate. I checked the time. It was just after 7. Where's Summer? She left for New York yesterday, Fashion Week events. The stress in his voice was evident. I wouldn't ask if I had any other option, believe me. Despite our recent friction, he was still my brother. Text me your address. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Ryan lived in a luxury apartment building in Back Bay, about 20 minutes from my place in Cambridge. I pulled up to the gleaming high-rise at 7:45 and texted him that I was outside. He emerged promptly, looking immaculate in a charcoal suit and blue tie, carrying a leather portfolio. His expression as he approached my car was a mixture of gratitude and discomfort. Thanks for doing this, he said, folding his tall frame into the passenger seat of my Corolla. I owe you one. No problem. I merged back into traffic. Where's this meeting? Seaport District. The new Waterline building. He checked his watch. We have plenty of time. We drove in awkward silence for several minutes. Ryan fidgeted with his cufflinks, clearly uncomfortable in my modest vehicle. Your check engine light is on, he finally said, gesturing to the dashboard. It's been on for 2 years. Mechanic says it's just a sensor issue. He sighed. You know, that's exactly the kind of thing that, let's not start this again, I interrupted. It's too early, and I'm doing you a favor. Ryan held up his hands in surrender. You're right. Sorry. Another minute of silence passed. We haven't really talked since Mom and Dad's anniversary. Not much to say. You made your feelings about my car and lifestyle pretty clear. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I may have been a bit harsh. It's just frustrating to see you settling for less than you deserve. I took a deep breath, considering my options. For years, I'd kept my financial situation private, not out of shame, but because I valued my privacy and didn't want my wealth to change how people, especially family, treated me. But maybe it was time for Ryan to understand there was more to my story than he assumed. I need to make a quick stop before your meeting, I said, changing lanes. Ryan checked his watch again, frowning. We have time, but make it quick? It'll be worth it. I need to pick up some paperwork from my storage unit. 20 minutes later, we pulled into an industrial area in South Boston. Ryan's impatience was visible as I punched a code into a keypad at a large metal gate. This doesn't look like a regular storage facility, he remarked as the gate swung open. It's not, I replied, driving through and approaching what looked like a row of high-end garage units. I stopped in front of one with the number 17 on the door, cut the engine, and got out of the car. Ryan reluctantly followed. Allison, I appreciate whatever this is, but I have a meeting. This will just take a minute, I assured him, entering another code on the garage door keypad. The large door began to rise slowly, revealing the space within. Ryan's sentence died in his throat as light gradually illuminated the contents of the climate-controlled garage. His eyes widened, and his mouth actually fell open as he took in the sight before him. Parked in perfect formation were 5 automobiles, each one immaculately maintained. On the far left sat a pristine classic 1967 Shelby Mustang GT500 in Highland Green. Next to it, a rare 1970 Plymouth Hemi-Cuda convertible in lemon twist yellow gleamed under the lights. The center position was occupied by a 2005 Ford GT in iconic Gulf racing colors, powder blue, with a striking orange stripe. Beside that stood a vintage Porsche 911 Carrera in Guards red. And completing the collection was a brand new Tesla Model S Plaid in midnight silver. Ryan stood frozen, his eyes moving from car to car in disbelief. When he finally found his voice, all he could manage was a strangled, "What? How?" I leaned against the door frame, allowing myself a small moment of satisfaction at his shock. "I've been investing in collector cars for about 8 years now," I explained calmly. "The Mustang was my first significant purchase. It's tripled in value since then. The Cuda is the rarest. They only made 14 convertibles with the Hemi engine in 1970. The Ford GT has the lowest mileage of any 2005 model on the market. The Porsche is actually the most affordable in the collection, but it's appreciated steadily. And the Tesla is just for fun. I wanted to see what all the hype was about." Ryan walked slowly into the garage, approaching the Mustang with reverence. "This collection, it must be worth just over $4 million at current market valuations," I finished for him. Though the Cuda might bring more at auction, the market for vintage Mopars has been hot lately. He turned to me, his expression a complex mixture of confusion, shock, and the dawning of a new respect. "Why do you drive that Toyota then?" he asked, gesturing vaguely toward my Corolla parked outside. I smiled. "Because it's practical. It gets me where I need to go without drawing attention. It costs almost nothing to maintain. And most importantly, it's transportation, not an investment." I ran my hand along the Ford GT's sleek fender. "These, on the other hand, are appreciating assets. They gain value while sitting right here, protected and maintained." Ryan's financial brain seemed to be finally computing what I was saying. "You're treating cars as investment vehicles rather than status symbols." "Exactly. The Toyota depreciates, but it does so minimally because I bought it used. Meanwhile, this collection has averaged a 14% annual return, better than most of my stock investments." He shook his head slowly, still processing. "But you could drive one of these." "The Tesla at least." I agreed. "But then I'd have to worry about door dings, parking lot scratches, break-ins. Plus, the Corolla is my privacy shield. No one looks twice at a woman in a Toyota, which is exactly how I prefer it." Ryan was quiet for a long moment, studying me with new eyes. "There's more to this than just cars, isn't there?" I nodded, reaching for my phone. "Let's get to your meeting. I'll show you the rest on the way." As we drove toward the Seaport District, I pulled my tablet from my bag at a stoplight and handed it to Ryan. "Open the folder called Portfolio Summary," I instructed. Ryan navigated to the file, still seeming dazed from the revelation of my car collection. When the document opened, he fell silent again, scrolling through pages of financial statements, investment accounts, and property holdings. "This is..." He started, then stopped, continuing to scroll. "My full financial picture," I finished for him. "I've been meaning to organize it better, but it's all there." He looked up at me, then back at the tablet. "Allison, you're worth about $22 million as of last month's valuations," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "Though the market's been volatile lately." Ryan let out a low whistle. "How? Your job is good, but this is..." "My job pays well, but you're right, my salary alone doesn't explain this." I changed lanes smoothly. "Remember that first tech startup I joined out of college? The one Mom and Dad thought was a risky choice." He nodded. "I negotiated for equity instead of a higher salary. When they were acquired 3 years later, my shares were worth just over $1 million. I invested most of it in the second startup, where I was one of the first 10 employees. When they went public, that turned into about $6 million." "You never said anything," Ryan said quietly. What was I supposed to say? "Pass the potatoes, and by the way, I'm a multi-millionaire." I shrugged. "I reinvested nearly everything. The classic car collection, yes, but also commercial real estate, index funds, and angel investments in women-led tech companies." We stopped at another light, and I turned to look at him directly. "I don't live modestly because I have to, Ryan. I live modestly because I choose to. My townhouse is paid for. I have no debt. My Toyota gets me where I need to go without maintenance headaches. The rest of my money works for me and for causes I believe in." As the light turned green, I continued driving. Ryan was silent, still scrolling through my financial records. Is this a scholarship fund? He asked, pausing on one document. I nodded. I fund STEM scholarships for girls from low-income backgrounds. 15 full rides at the moment, with plans to expand to 25 next year. You're doing this anonymously, he noted, reading the details. I don't need recognition for it. I just want those girls to have the opportunities one had. We were getting closer to his meeting location. Ryan put down the tablet and stared out the window, clearly processing everything I'd shared. I've been such an ass, he finally said. You didn't know, I replied. That's not an excuse. I judged you. I made assumptions based on superficial things. I actually lectured you about financial literacy when you're clearly. He gestured at the tablet. When you've clearly mastered it far better than I have. I pulled up to the curb half a block from his meeting location. We all have different values and priorities, Ryan. You're not wrong to want nice things or to care about your image. That's important in your world. He turned to face me fully. Can I ask you something? And please be honest. Of course. Why did you decide to show me all this today? You could have just given me a ride and continued letting me believe what I wanted to believe. I considered the question carefully. I think I was tired of the distance between us. We used to be close when we were kids, before image and status became so important. I miss my brother. Ryan looked down at his hands. The truth is, I'm not doing nearly as well as I pretend to be. This surprised me. What do you mean? The Porsche? It's leased, and I can barely afford the payments. The apartment has a great address, but I'm stretched thin every month. Between summer's expectations, keeping up appearances for clients, and trying to build my reputation at the firm. He sighed heavily. I'm actually carrying significant debt. I had no idea, I said softly. How could you? I've worked very hard to make sure no one knows. He checked his watch and grimaced. I need to go in a minute, but... Would you have dinner with me soon? I think we have a lot more to talk about. I nodded. I'd like that. As he gathered his portfolio and prepared to exit the car, he hesitated. Can I ask one more thing? Sure. The Tesla, would it be totally out of line if I borrowed it for a day sometime? Just to see what it's like. A hint of his boyish enthusiasm shone through his professional veneer. I laughed. Tell you what. Ace your meeting today, and I'll let you drive it back to your place afterward. Ryan's face lit up. Really? Keys are in the storage lockbox. I can take you back there after your meeting. For the first time in years, I saw a genuine smile spread across my brother's face, not the polished, confident smile he showed the world, but the real, joyful grin I remembered from our childhood. Thanks, Sally, he said, using my childhood nickname for the first time in at least a decade. For everything. The ride, the truth, all of it. As he walked toward his meeting, I saw him stand a little straighter, but also a little lighter, as if some invisible burden had shifted. I realized that perhaps my secret wealth wasn't the only mask that needed to come off in our relationship. Maybe Ryan had been hiding behind his own facade all along. After Ryan's meeting, which apparently went well based on his buoyant mood, I took him back to my storage garage. The look of childlike excitement on his face as I handed him the Tesla key fob was worth every penny of the car's considerable price tag. Just remember, it accelerates faster than anything you've ever driven, I cautioned as he adjusted the seat and mirrors. 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds if you use launch control. I'll be careful, he promised, though his eager expression suggested caution might not be his top priority once he hit the open road. I followed him in my Toyota, smiling as I watched him experience the Tesla's instant torque at the first stoplight. By the time we reached his apartment building, he was completely smitten with the electric supercar. That was incredible, he said as we stood in the parking garage. I've never felt acceleration like that before. It's pretty impressive, I agreed. Though personally, I still prefer the visceral experience of the classics. There's something about the sound and feel of that Hemi Cuda that no electric car can match. Ryan nodded thoughtfully. I think I understand a little better now why you keep the Corolla for daily driving. These cars aren't just transportation, they're experiences, investments, passions. Exactly. I smiled. The Toyota is just a tool, like a reliable washing machine. These other cars fulfill different purposes entirely. Before I called a rideshare back to my car, Ryan suggested we grab coffee at a small cafe near his building. It was the first time in years we'd sat down together without the pretense of a family obligation or special occasion. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said earlier," he began after we'd ordered. "About how you live modestly by choice rather than necessity." "It works for me," I said. "But everyone's different." "The thing is," he continued, "I'm realizing that my choices haven't been making me happy. I'm stressed all the time about money, even though I make a good salary. The pressure to maintain appearances is exhausting." I listened as Ryan opened up about the competitive culture at his firm, where status symbols were practically required equipment. He described how his relationship with Summer had accelerated his spending habits, with expensive dinners, weekend getaways, and gifts becoming routine expectations. "She's not a bad person," he clarified. "She just grew up in a world where these things are normal. Her father buys her mother a new luxury car every 2 years. Their vacation home in the Hamptons is bigger than our parents' house." "Have you talked to her about your financial concerns?" I asked. Ryan shook his head. "I've been too afraid to admit the truth. What if she sees me differently? If her feelings change based on your bank account, isn't that something you'd want to know?" He looked down at his coffee. "Maybe that's what I'm afraid of finding out." Over the next few weeks, Ryan and I began rebuilding our relationship through regular dinners and honest conversations. I shared more details about my investment strategies and philanthropic work, while he gradually revealed the extent of his financial struggles and the pressure he felt to project success. During one of these dinners, Ryan announced he had made a decision. "I'm selling the Porsche," he said. "It's the most expensive item in my monthly budget, and honestly, I'm tired of worrying about door dings and parking it on the street." "What will you drive instead?" I asked. "I was hoping you might help me find something reasonable," he replied. "Something reliable but not flashy. Maybe a couple years old to avoid the worst depreciation." I couldn't help but smile at how much his perspective had shifted. "I think I can help with that." True to his word, Ryan sold the Porsche the following week and used the proceeds to pay down his credit card debt. We spent a Saturday visiting used car dealerships, eventually finding a 3-year-old Audi A4 with low mileage at a fair price. It was still a nice car, but far more practical than his previous vehicle. "Summer hates it," he admitted when we met for lunch the next week. "She says it looks like a car my dad would drive." "How do you feel about it?" I asked. "Relieved," he answered honestly. "Every time I make a payment, I know I'm not just throwing money away on depreciation and interest. And it's actually more comfortable for daily driving." The most surprising transformation came a month later when Ryan called to tell me he and Summer had broken up. "What happened?" I asked, concerned about how defeated he sounded. "I finally had the conversation about finances," he explained. "I told her I wanted to live more within my means, pay down debt, and build actual wealth rather than just the appearance of it. She said if I was having a midlife crisis at 32, I should talk to a therapist, not expect her to downgrade her lifestyle." Though Ryan was hurting, I sensed this breakup might ultimately be healthy for him. Over the next few months, he continued making changes, moving to a smaller apartment in a less prestigious, but still pleasant neighborhood, bringing lunch to work instead of dining out daily, and even opening his first investment account beyond his company's 401k. The real test came at Thanksgiving when our extended family gathered at our parents' home. Ryan arrived in his Audi, dressed in a sweater and slacks rather than his usual designer suit. When our cousin Keith made a comment about Ryan slumming it with his new car, I braced myself for an awkward moment. Instead, Ryan smiled confidently. "Actually, I've been learning a lot about smart money management from Allison. Turns out my big sister is something of a financial genius." Our mother looked surprised. "Allison? But she still drives that old Toyota." "Exactly," Ryan replied. "She understands something I'm just figuring out, that true wealth isn't about showing off, it's about security and freedom." The conversation shifted as our relatives peppered us with questions. With a glance at me for permission, Ryan shared a simplified version of my success story, careful to keep specific numbers private, but making it clear that my modest lifestyle was a choice backed by substantial financial security. Our parents were stunned. "Why didn't you ever tell us, Allison?" my mother asked, looking slightly hurt. "I didn't want to be treated differently," I explained. And honestly, it just never seemed like the right time to announce it. As the holiday progressed, I noticed subtle shifts in how our family interacted with both of us. There was new respect in how they addressed me and less pressure on Ryan to perform as the family success story. For the first time in years, we were just brother and sister again, without the weight of misunderstandings and assumptions between us. After dinner, Ryan and I escaped the family chaos for a quiet moment on the back porch. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For showing me there's another way to live. For not judging me when I was being an insufferable snob." He smiled ruefully. "For giving me a chance to know the real you, even when I probably didn't deserve it." I bumped his shoulder with mine, the way I used to when we were kids. That's what siblings are for. Keeping each other humble and picking each other up when needed. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment. "Maybe I could help with your scholarship program? I'm not in your financial league, but I could mentor some of the girls, help with networking, that kind of thing." The offer touched me deeply. "They'd be lucky to have you. Despite your recent identity crisis, you're still pretty impressive, little brother." He laughed, and in that moment, it felt like we'd recovered something precious that had been lost for too long. 6 months after my brother discovered my secret garage, we gathered at my townhouse for a small dinner party. I'd finally decided to move to a slightly larger home, not for show, but because I wanted more space for a home office and guest room. Ryan was helping me celebrate. He arrived early to help with preparations, pulling into my driveway in his Audi, which now sported a small dent in the rear bumper that he hadn't bothered to fix. "It's a car, not a status symbol," he'd explained when I asked about it. "Battle scars are part of life." As he helped me arrange appetizers, he shared his latest news. "Summer got engaged last week. To Keith Wellington from Blackstone Group. Are you okay with that?" I asked carefully. Ryan considered the question. "Honestly? Yes. She'll get the lifestyle she wants, and I've realized we were fundamentally mismatched in our values." He arranged cucumber slices on a platter with surprising precision. "I'm dating someone new, actually. She's a public defender. Brilliant, passionate about her work, and completely unimpressed by material things." "She sounds wonderful," I said sincerely. "I'd like to meet her." "You will. She's coming tonight." He glanced at his watch. "She'll be here in about an hour." She had a case wrap up late. Our parents arrived next, followed by a few close friends. Ryan's new girlfriend Jessica joined us later, apologizing for her delay but lighting up the room with her warm personality and quick wit. I liked her immediately. Over dinner, the conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from politics to travel plans. When my father mentioned my upcoming move, Jessica asked about my current place. "I love this neighborhood," she said. "The community garden 2 blocks over is amazing." "You'll have to come see the new place once I'm settled," I offered. "It's not far from here, just a bit more space." "And she's finally getting a garage," Ryan added with a meaningful smile. "Speaking of which," I said, "I have something to show everyone after dinner." When we'd finished our meal and cleared the dishes, I led my guests to my computer, where I had a presentation ready. On the screen was an image of the newest addition to my car collection. A 1963 Jaguar E-Type Roadster in British racing green. It just completed a full restoration, I explained as my friends and family admired the classic car. The previous owner spent 3 years getting every detail perfect. "It's gorgeous," my mother said, surprising me. She'd never shown much interest in cars before. The E-Type was called the most beautiful car ever made by Enzo Ferrari himself, my father added, equally surprisingly. I had a model of one as a boy. As I clicked through photos detailing the car's immaculate engine bay and hand-stitched leather interior, I caught Ryan watching me with a smile. "What?" I asked during a lull in the conversation. "I was just thinking about how things change," he said. "A year ago, I was giving you grief about your Toyota, completely clueless about your collection. Now here we are, with Mom and Dad discussing the merits of inline-six engines. Everyone laughed, and the evening continued with dessert and coffee. As our guests began to leave, Ryan and Jessica stayed behind to help clean up. "I've been meaning to ask," Ryan said as he loaded the dishwasher. "Are you still driving the Corolla?" "Every day," I confirmed. "Though I did finally fix that check engine light." "Progress," he teased. Jessica looked between us. "I feel like I'm missing something about this famous Toyota." Ryan put his arm around her shoulders. "My sister taught me one of the most important lessons of my life with that car." "Want to tell her, or should I?" I leaned against the counter, considering how to summarize what we'd both learned. "I think it comes down to this. Appearances rarely tell the whole story. Success has as many definitions as there are people seeking it. And authenticity matters more than approval." Also, Ryan added, "Sometimes people need to see your garage, metaphorically speaking, before they truly see you." Jessica nodded thoughtfully. "I deal with that every day in court. The assumptions people make based on appearances, the stories we tell ourselves about others without knowing their full truth." After they left, I stood in my kitchen, reflecting on the journey of the past year. My relationship with Ryan had healed in ways I never expected. My parents now understood me better, even if they still occasionally suggested I could enjoy my success a little more. And I had become more open about my financial situation with those closest to me, finding that authentic connections were possible even with the potential complications of wealth. The next morning, I backed my trusty Toyota out of the driveway, heading to a meeting with the young women in my scholarship program. The car was as reliable and unassuming as ever, but now it represented something different to me. Not just practicality, but a reminder of how easy it is to misjudge others and be misjudged. As I drove, I thought about Ryan's journey from status-obsessed to thoughtfully balanced, and my own journey from privacy to selective openness. We had both grown, finding our way to more authentic versions of ourselves and a deeper understanding of what truly matters. What about you? How do you define success in your own life? Is it about what you own, what others see, or something less visible but more meaningful? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more reflections on life, relationships, and the unexpected lessons we learn along the way. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, sometimes the most valuable things we own aren't things at all, but the connections and understanding we build with those around us. I'm Brooke Mitchell, 27, and last month my sister Ashley told me I was socially unfit to attend her wedding. The text blindsided me completely. For years, my family has found my social anxiety and possible neurodivergence embarrassing, but this exclusion from my only sister's wedding cut deeper than anything before. As I stared at those cruel words on my phone, something inside me finally broke and then rebuilt stronger. So instead of fighting to be included, I booked myself a peace retreat. If you've ever felt like the family outsider, stick around. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe to join me on this journey of self-discovery. Growing up as Brooke Mitchell was like being a puzzle piece that never quite fit. From my earliest memories, I was always the different one in our picture-perfect family. While my sister Ashley effortlessly charmed everyone she met, I struggled with the most basic social interactions. Birthday parties were torture chambers of overstimulation. School dances were anxiety-inducing nightmares. And family gatherings? Those were complex obstacle courses where I inevitably knocked something over, said something inappropriate, or needed to escape to a quiet room. My parents, Karen and Frank Mitchell, weren't terrible people. They just never understood me. Mom was the neighborhood social butterfly who hosted dinner parties and ran the PTA with military precision. Dad was the charismatic sales executive whose clients became lifelong friends. Both were extroverts to their core, and they had created another perfect social specimen in my older sister Ashley. Ashley and I were close once, believe it or not. When we were very young, before social expectations became so important, she was my protector. There's this faded photograph in our family album of 5-year-old Ashley with her arm around 3-year-old me at the beach. I was crying because the waves were too loud, and she was glaring at the ocean like she could intimidate it into silence for my sake. I keep a copy of that photo on my nightstand as a reminder of what we once were to each other. But as we grew older, the gap between us widened. By middle school, Ashley had fully embraced her role as the family golden child. She was pretty, popular, and perfectly attuned to social cues I couldn't even perceive. Meanwhile, I was the awkward, bookish sister who flinched at loud noises and couldn't maintain eye contact during conversations. "Why can't you just be normal for once?" became Ashley's refrain whenever I embarrassed her in front of her friends. Sometimes she'd say it with a laugh, like it was a joke we were both in on. But I always heard the edge underneath. The Christmas when I was 15 marked the first major breaking point. Mom had invited 30 people to our house. Extended family, neighbors, Dad's colleagues. The noise, the smells, the constant demand for small talk, it was overwhelming. I retreated to the kitchen to help with dishes, seeking some quiet, when Aunt Patricia cornered me with questions about boys and college plans. Something in me snapped. I dropped a serving platter, shattering it across the tile floor, and fled upstairs in tears. Later that night, I overheard Ashley telling Mom, "She ruins everything." Christmas is supposed to be perfect. My high school graduation was another disaster. The crowded auditorium, the thunderous applause, the scratchy gown against my skin, it all became too much. I had a full panic attack right after receiving my diploma. Instead of celebrating at the planned family dinner, my parents had to take me home early. Ashley missed her friend's graduation party to sit in a restaurant with our disappointed relatives, and she didn't speak to me for 2 weeks afterward. College became my salvation. I attended Syracuse University, studying library science, far enough away from my hometown that I could reinvent myself. There, I found my people, other quiet, thoughtful students who didn't find my directness odd or my sensitivity excessive. For the first time, I didn't feel defective. But each return home for holidays reinforced the growing distance between my family and me. They saw my newfound confidence as further evidence of my peculiarity. College has made her even more herself. I once overheard Mom telling her friend Nancy on the phone, the pause speaking volumes. When Ashley met Jackson Lewis during her final year of law school, I knew immediately he was the one, not because I'm romantic, but because he checked every box on the Mitchell family-approved spouse list. Handsome, wealthy family background, corporate law career on the rise, socially adept, and most importantly, he found Ashley absolutely captivating. His family practically oozed old money and connections. The Lewises weren't just wealthy, they were influential in exactly the circles my social climbing sister had always aspired to enter. I was genuinely happy for her. Despite our differences, I wanted Ashley to have the life she desired. When she called to announce their engagement, I congratulated her sincerely and listened to her elaborate plans for what she called the society wedding of the season. "You'll be a bridesmaid, of course," she said, almost as an afterthought. "We'll need to find a dress that works with your sensitivities. Nothing too fitted, maybe? And we'll make sure you're not overwhelmed at the rehearsal dinner." I was touched by what I interpreted as consideration. Looking back, I should have recognized the warning signs in her tone, the way she was already framing me as a potential problem to be managed. For the next few months, I was included in the group emails and occasional wedding planning brunches. I sat quietly through discussions of floral arrangements and table settings, nodding at appropriate intervals and offering opinions only when directly asked. I thought I was doing well, adapting to the social demands of being in a bridal party. What I didn't know was that Ashley was keeping a mental tally of every odd thing I did. Every time I excused myself for a brief break from the overwhelming chatter. Every direct question about costs that made others uncomfortable. Every declined invitation to yet another pre-wedding celebration because I was conserving my social energy. All the while, she was building her case against me. It was a Tuesday evening in April when my phone buzzed with a text from Ashley. I was curled up on my couch with a cup of chamomile tea, unwinding after a long day at the university library where I worked. The rain tapped gently against my apartment windows as I opened the message, expecting another wedding update or question about centerpieces. Instead, What filled my screen was a paragraph that would permanently alter our relationship. Brooke, I've been thinking about this for weeks, and I need to be honest with you. I don't think it's a good idea for you to be in the wedding party or even attend the ceremony. Jackson's family is extremely important in Dad's industry, and this wedding is essentially a networking event for our parents too. I love you, but you're socially unfit for an occasion of this caliber. Your unpredictable behaviors and awkwardness would draw attention away from the celebration and potentially embarrass us in front of people whose opinions matter. I hope you understand this isn't personal, it's practical. Maybe we can celebrate privately after the honeymoon. I read it once. Twice. 3 times. Each time hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something less cruel. They didn't. Socially unfit. The phrase burned into my brain, searing away any illusions I still harbored about my place in my sister's life. I sat frozen, my tea growing cold beside me, as a second text appeared. To be specific, at the engagement party you corrected Jackson's mother about the year her family home was built. At the bridal brunch, you disappeared for 30 minutes without telling anyone because the restaurant was too loud. At the dress fitting, you made that scene about the fabric being unbearable against your skin. These are exactly the kinds of unpredictable behaviors we can't risk during the actual wedding. My hands trembled as I tried to type a response. Delete. Type again. Delete. What could I possibly say? That I was sorry for existing the only way I knew how? That I would pretend to be someone else for her perfect day? Instead, I called my mother, tears streaming down my face, certain that even she would find this exclusion excessive. Mom, I choked out when she answered, Ashley just uninvited me from her wedding. She said I'm socially unfit to even attend. The pause before her response told me everything. Honey, she finally said, her voice carefully measured. Ashley may have expressed herself harshly, but perhaps she has a point about the pressure of the day. You do get overwhelmed easily, and this wedding is very important for everyone's future. Maybe it would be less stressful for you to skip the ceremony and just attend the small family brunch the next day. The betrayal was complete. My own mother was siding with Ashley. So you agree with her? That I'm too embarrassing to be seen at my only sister's wedding. My voice had taken on a strange, hollow quality I didn't recognize. That's not what I said, Brooke. Don't twist my words. We just want what's best for everyone, including you. You know how you get in crowded, emotional situations. I ended the call shortly after, unable to continue the conversation without completely falling apart. My father called next, his awkward attempt at mediation even more painful than my mother's tacit agreement with Ashley. Kitten, he said, using my childhood nickname that suddenly felt patronizing, your sister is under a lot of pressure. The Lewises are very traditional people. Very conventional. You know you've never been conventional, and that's not a bad thing. But maybe for this one day. Maybe for this one day I should cease to exist? I finished for him. Because that's what she's asking, Dad. Not for me to dress differently or speak less. She's saying my very presence is unacceptable. He had no answer for that. After hanging up, I sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, my mind replaying a lifetime of moments when I'd been made to feel wrong, broken, or insufficient by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Every "why can't you just" and "if only you would" and everyone else can that had been thrown at me over the years. In that moment of complete isolation, something snapped inside me. But rather than breaking down, I felt an unexpected clarity emerge from the pain. I took screenshots of Ashley's texts and sent them to my friend Zoe Wallace with a simple message, I need you. Then I allowed myself to fully feel the rage and grief that had been building for 27 years. I screamed into a pillow until my throat was raw. I threw the special bridesmaid proposal box Ashley had given me months earlier against the wall, watching with grim satisfaction as the carefully curated contents scattered across my floor. For one wild moment, I contemplated showing up at the wedding anyway, making exactly the scene they all feared. But as the initial shock began to fade, I realized that revenge wasn't what I truly wanted. What I needed, desperately, was healing. And distance from the people who couldn't see my worth. 30 minutes after I texted Zoe, my doorbell rang. She stood there in mismatched sweatpants and a hastily thrown-on jacket, holding a bottle of wine and a pint of chocolate ice cream. "I brought the emergency kit," she said, her eyes already blazing with protective fury. "Show me everything." Zoe Wallace had been my best friend since our sophomore year of college, when we were paired as lab partners in an information systems class. Where others found my directness off-putting, Zoe appreciated my honesty. Where others were exhausted by my need for routine, Zoe found it endearing. She was the first person who ever made me feel like I wasn't fundamentally defective. I handed her my phone and watched her expression darken as she read Ashley's messages. "That absolute witch," she muttered, scrolling further. "Socially unfit? Is she casting for a debutante ball or having a wedding? And your parents are backing her up?" She looked up at me, her indignation shifting to concern. "Oh, Brooke. I'm so sorry." For the next several hours, we sat on my living room floor, surrounded by comfort food wrappers, as I poured out every painful detail. Zoe listened, occasionally offering colorful suggestions about what Ashley could do with her caliber wedding. "You could fight this," she said eventually, refilling our wine glasses. "Make a huge family stink. Force them to acknowledge how cruel this is." "And then what?" I asked. "Sit through a wedding where I know I'm not wanted? Where everyone's watching me, waiting for me to do something socially unfit? Or you could completely ghost them. Block everyone's numbers. Don't respond to anything about the wedding." I considered this option, but it didn't feel right either. That still lets them control the narrative. They'll tell everyone I had a meltdown or couldn't handle the attention not being on me. "What do you want to do then?" Zoe asked gently. The question hung in the air between us. What did I want? Not just about the wedding, but about my relationship with my family moving forward. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider that I might need to create serious boundaries with the people who had consistently made me feel less than. "I need space," I finally said. "Literal and emotional space. I can't make any decisions while I'm still this hurt." After Zoe left around midnight, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment, mind racing with painful thoughts. On impulse, I opened my laptop and typed healing retreats into the search bar. Dozens of options appeared, but one immediately caught my eye: Peace Within Wellness Retreat in Sedona, Arizona. The website showed stunning red rock formations, minimalist accommodations, and a program focused on mindfulness, nature connection, and personal growth. Unlike many similar retreats, this one specifically mentioned being neurodiversity-friendly, with options for private accommodations and sensory-considerate programming. I checked the available dates and felt a strange calm settle over me when I saw they had an opening for a week-long retreat that coincided perfectly with Ashley's wedding. It was expensive, almost all of my modest savings, but as I looked at the serene images, something just clicked. At 3:17 a.m., I booked the retreat, putting down the non-refundable deposit before I could second-guess myself. Then I sent a brief email to my supervisor at the library requesting the time off. For the first time since receiving Ashley's text, I felt a flicker of power return. If I wasn't fit for their celebration, I would create my own journey of healing instead. Their rejection would become my redirection. As I finally crawled into bed, physically and emotionally exhausted, I felt something unexpected alongside the pain, a tiny spark of curiosity about what this retreat might bring and who I might become in the process. Word travels quickly in families, especially when it contradicts the preferred narrative. I hadn't planned to tell my parents about the retreat immediately, wanting to process my decision privately first. But Zoe, in her protective enthusiasm, had mentioned it to her mother, who played tennis with my mother's friend Gloria, and within 48 hours, my phone was ringing with Karen Mitchell's special ringtone. I almost didn't answer. Almost. A retreat. My mother's voice carried that particular blend of confusion and disapproval she'd perfected over the years. "During your sister's wedding weekend? Brooke, please tell me this is some kind of negotiation tactic." I pressed my fingertips against my temple, already feeling a headache forming. "It's not a tactic, Mom. Ashley made it crystal clear I'm not welcome at the wedding. I'm using that time to take care of myself instead." "But she didn't mean you couldn't come at all." She was just worried about certain aspects of the ceremony being overwhelming for you. The careful rephrasing made my blood boil. Mom, I have the texts. She said I was socially unfit and would embarrass the family. Those were her exact words. You know how Ashley gets when she's stressed. She's under tremendous pressure with the Lewises breathing down her neck about every detail. She spoke harshly, but you agree with her, I finished. You've made that clear. The conversation continued in circles, my mother alternating between guilt trips. This will break your father's heart, minimization. It was just one thoughtless text. And outright manipulation. If you really loved your sister, you'd understand. When we finally hung up, I felt drained but surprisingly steady in my resolve. The retreat was no longer just a healing space, it had become my declaration of independence. My father called the next day, his approach more direct than my mother's emotional maneuvering. I spoke with Ashley, he said after awkward preliminaries. She feels terrible about how she expressed herself. She says you're making this situation bigger than it needs to be. By refusing to beg for an invitation to my sister's wedding. I asked. By booking this retreat thing instead of working through this as a family. It looks like you're trying to punish her. I laughed without humor. That's interesting, Dad. I'm excluded from a major family event, and somehow I'm the one causing problems by making alternative plans. The timing makes it look intentional, Brooke. It is intentional. I'm intentionally choosing not to sit home alone crying on the day my sister gets married without me. My father sighed, that familiar sound of disappointment I'd heard throughout my childhood. Ashley says if you cancel this retreat, she'll reconsider having you at the ceremony. Not as a bridesmaid, but as a guest. That seems like a reasonable compromise. The audacity was breathtaking. So I can attend if I demonstrate proper contrition first? No thanks. 3 days later, Ashley herself called. I let it go to voicemail, but listened immediately. Brooke, this retreat stunt is exactly the kind of dramatic behavior I was worried about. You're making my wedding about you again. If you just apologized for being difficult during the planning process instead of running away, we could have worked something out. Mom and Dad are upset, Jackson's parents are asking questions, and I'm the one dealing with all of it. Please call me back so we can fix this before you make things worse. I didn't call back. Instead, I drafted a clear, concise email to my immediate family. I will be attending the Peace Within Wellness retreat during the week of May 15th to 22nd. This is not up for discussion or negotiation. I will be turning off my phone during this time to fully engage with the healing process. I wish Ashley and Jackson a beautiful wedding day, and I hope someday you'll understand that this decision is about taking care of myself, not punishing anyone else. I'll be in touch after I return. Brooke, the extended family reactions were mixed and painful. Cousin Taylor sent a sympathetic text, but admitted she couldn't take sides. Uncle Robert wrote a tone-deaf email suggesting I just try harder for one day for Ashley's sake. But 2 unexpected allies emerged from the fracas. My grandmother Diana, my father's mother, called me directly. I just heard what's happening, she said, her voice carrying the slight tremor of her 80 years, but none of the uncertainty of her son's wavering loyalty. I wanted you to know that I remember what it was like when you were little. You weren't difficult. You were sensitive in a world that isn't made for sensitive people. Tears sprang to my eyes. Thanks, Grandma. Your sister is wrong to exclude you, and your parents are wrong not to stand up for you. I told them as much. She paused. I've also decided I won't be attending the wedding either. Grandma, no, I protested. You shouldn't miss it because of me. I'm 80 years old, dear. I've earned the right to spend my time only with people who know how to love properly. This retreat sounds much more pleasant than watching your sister preen for the country club set anyway. My other surprise defender was Aunt Susan, my mother's younger sister who had always been the family rebel. She sent me a private Facebook message, heard about the wedding drama. Wanted you to know I think you're handling it with more grace than I would. Also, I did a similar retreat in Sedona 2 years ago after my divorce. Life-changing. Bring journals and comfortable shoes. The desert has much to teach you. P.S. Your sister was always a bit of a princess. You're the interesting one. Despite these pockets of support, the weeks leading up to the retreat were a social media minefield. I muted Ashley on all platforms, but mutual friends kept tagging me in comments asking why I wasn't in the bridal shower photos or the bachelorette party videos. I watched from a digital distance as life continued without me, the cake tastings, the final dress fittings, the rehearsal plans. Each excluded moment was both a wound and a confirmation that I'd made the right choice. By the time my departure date approached, I felt hollowed out but determined. I'd gone completely no contact with my immediate family for the final week, focusing instead on preparing for the retreat. The night before my flight, I sat alone in my apartment, looking at old family photos. There was a particular image from Ashley's 16th birthday. She was blowing out candles, radiant in the center of attention, while I stood slightly apart from the gathered crowd, watching her with a mixture of admiration and alienation on my face. I'd never noticed before how much that photo captured our entire relationship dynamic. I carefully placed the pictures back in their box, packed the last of my comfortable clothes and hiking boots, and set my alarm. Tomorrow, while my family was busy with wedding rehearsal activities, I would be flying toward my own kind of ceremony, one of self-reclamation. The Sedona airport was tiny compared to the crowded New York terminals I'd departed from, its modest size immediately lowering my anxiety. As I stepped outside, the dry heat and extraordinary landscape momentarily took my breath away. Massive red rock formations towered against an impossibly blue sky, their rusty hues more vibrant than any photograph could capture. A woman holding a small Peace Within sign waved at me from beside a white van. "Brooke," she called. "I'm Gabriella, one of the retreat facilitators. Welcome to Sedona." Gabriella had the calm presence of someone completely comfortable in her own skin, something I'd always envied in others. During the drive to the retreat center, she explained that our group was small, just 8 participants, and that the schedule was designed to be both structured and flexible. "We understand that different people have different needs," she said, seeming to look right through my carefully composed exterior. "Nothing is mandatory. You can always step back or modify any activity to suit your comfort level." The retreat center itself was a collection of adobe buildings nestled against the red rocks, with drought-resistant gardens creating peaceful pathways between structures. My private room was simple but beautiful, a comfortable bed, a small desk by a window with a breathtaking view, and a tiny private patio with a meditation cushion. Despite Gabriella's reassurances, I felt the familiar tension headache forming as dinner approached. New people, new social dynamics to navigate, new opportunities to be socially unfit. I almost stayed in my room, but forced myself to attend, reminding myself that I'd come here to grow, not hide. The dining area was arranged with 2 tables of 4, allowing for conversation without overwhelming noise. Gabriella gently guided introductions, each participant sharing only their name and one word describing what they hoped to find at the retreat. "Brooke." "Peace," I said when my turn came, surprising myself with the simplicity of what I truly wanted. Around me sat 7 strangers who would become unexpected companions on my journey. Melissa, a recently divorced art teacher in her 40s seeking renewal. Tyler, a burnt-out tech executive in his 30s pursuing purpose. Amelia, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s who had lost her daughter 2 years earlier, seeking acceptance. James, a retired professor in his 70s looking for reconciliation. Daphne, a cancer survivor in her 30s embracing gratitude. Leo, a former addict in his 40s working toward forgiveness. Kai, a non-binary person in their 20s searching for authenticity. That first evening, we simply shared a quiet meal of fresh, locally sourced food. The conversation was minimal and unforced. No one asked probing personal questions or made demands for performative social engagement. I felt my shoulders gradually relaxing as I realized this space was different from any I'd experienced before. Our days fell into a gentle rhythm. Optional sunrise meditation. Breakfast eaten mostly in contemplative silence. Morning group sessions focused on mindfulness practices. Afternoon free time for hiking, journaling, or individual therapy sessions with the staff counselors. Evening gatherings around a fire pit, weather permitting, or in the cozy common room. On the third day, during a group session focused on family systems, I finally shared my story. I hadn't planned to, the words simply began flowing as Gabriella guided us through an exercise about family roles. "I'm here because my sister uninvited me from her wedding," I said, my voice catching. She told me I was socially unfit to attend. My parents didn't defend me. "The wedding is happening right now, actually, back in New York." The room fell silent. I braced myself for judgment or, worse, pity. Instead, what I received was something entirely unfamiliar: pure acceptance. "Thank you for sharing that, Brooke," Gabriella said. What a painful exclusion to experience. Melissa reached over and briefly touched my hand. "Their loss," she said simply. Tyler nodded. "Family knows exactly where to aim the arrow, don't they?" One by one, the others acknowledged my pain without trying to fix it or explain it away. No one suggested I was overreacting or being too sensitive. No one implied I must have done something to deserve the rejection. They simply witnessed my hurt with compassion. That afternoon, I joined a guided hike through the Red Rocks with James, Amelia, and Kai. As we carefully navigated the terrain, the vastness of the landscape put my personal pain into perspective without diminishing it. These ancient formations had witnessed countless human dramas, yet remained steadfastly themselves through millennia of weathering. Sometimes, our guide Ramon said, the desert teaches us that standing alone does not mean standing incorrectly. The words resonated through me like a tuning fork struck against stone. That evening, I sat on my little patio watching the sunset transform the Red Rocks into fiery beacons. For the first time since Ashley's text, I found myself crying not from hurt, but from release. Something was shifting inside me, creating space where before there had only been constriction. The next day, the actual day of Ashley's wedding, I woke early and checked my phone despite my best intentions. There were several missed calls from my parents and a text from my mother. "It's not too late to come. We saved you a seat just in case." The message wasn't an apology or even an acknowledgement of the harm done. It was one final attempt to fit me back into the family narrative on their terms. I turned my phone off completely and joined the sunrise meditation circle. Later that morning, I had my scheduled one-on-one session with Gabriella. She listened attentively as I processed my feelings about the wedding happening without me. "What surprises you most about how you feel today?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. That I don't feel jealous or regretful. I feel peaceful. Like I'm exactly where I need to be. She smiled. "That's a powerful realization. What does that tell you?" "That maybe I've been trying to belong in places that were never meant for me." That afternoon, while Ashley was saying her vows 3,000 miles away, I was sitting by a small creek, writing in my journal. I filled pages with insights about patterns I'd never noticed before, how I'd internalized my family's judgment and learned to see myself through their critical lens. How I'd spent years contorting myself to fit into spaces that were fundamentally uncomfortable. How I'd come to believe that the problem was inherently me, rather than a mismatch between my authentic self and certain environments. When I returned to the retreat center, there was a message from Zoe with several photos attached. She'd been invited to the wedding as a friend of both of us and had decided to attend partly to support my parents, who she genuinely liked, and partly, as she put it, for reconnaissance. The images showed my sister looking conventionally beautiful in her designer gown, my parents smiling stiffly beside the new couple, the elaborate floral arrangements and ice sculptures and champagne fountain. Everything looked perfect, polished, and utterly impersonal. "Everyone keeps asking where you are," Zoe had written. "Your mom is telling people you had a prior commitment you couldn't break. Your dad looks miserable. Ashley seems completely in her element with Jackson's country club crowd. You're not missing anything authentic. How's the desert?" I sent back a photo of myself from the hike, red dust on my hiking boots, hair wild from the wind, smiling genuinely in a way I rarely did in family photos. "Finding my peace," I replied. "Tell you everything when I'm back." As the retreat continued, I formed unexpected connections with my fellow participants. During an art therapy session, Melissa and I discovered we both processed emotions through color in similar ways. Tyler and I bonded over our shared love of systems and order. James became a grandfatherly presence, offering wisdom without imposition. On our second-to-last evening, the retreat held a release ceremony. We each wrote down limiting beliefs and painful memories on biodegradable paper, then released them into a fire while speaking aloud our intentions for moving forward. When my turn came, I stepped forward and read what I'd written. I released the belief that I am socially unfit. I am differently wired, not defective. I released the need for approval from those who cannot see my value. I released the pattern of shrinking myself to fit others' expectations. I step forward into authentic connection with those who can appreciate me exactly as I am. As the paper curled and blackened in the flames, I felt something final and necessary burning away with it. On our last morning, I wrote a letter to my family that I had no intention of sending. The words were for me alone, a way of clarifying my boundaries moving forward. Then I joined the closing circle, where each participant shared one insight they were taking home. I've learned that peace isn't the absence of conflict, I said when my turn came. It's the presence of self-acceptance, even in the midst of others' disapproval. As we said our goodbyes, exchanging contact information and promises to stay connected, I realized I'd experienced more genuine connection in 1 week with these strangers than in years of family gatherings where I'd nominally belonged. The return journey to New York felt different. I was returning to the same physical space, but not the same internal landscape. Something fundamental had shifted during my time in the desert, not a dramatic transformation, but a quiet reclamation of truth. As the plane began its descent into JFK, I turned my phone back on, bracing for the inevitable barrage. Instead of dreading it, however, I felt curiously detached, as if watching the drama from a new, more grounded perspective. Zoe was waiting for me at the airport arrivals area, bouncing on her toes with barely contained curiosity. "Oh my God," she said, studying my face after our hug. "You look different. Do I have a desert sunburn?" I laughed, touching my cheeks. "No, it's not that." She tilted her head. "You look, I don't know, more solid somehow? Like you're fully occupying your own skin." It was an odd observation, but strangely accurate to how I felt. The retreat hadn't erased my neurodivergent traits or magically solved all my problems. I still flinched at the airport's cacophony and felt the familiar tension headache forming. But something had fundamentally shifted in how I related to these experiences. Instead of shame, I felt simple acknowledgement. This is how my system works. It's not wrong, just different. In Zoe's car, I gave her the full retreat rundown. The breathtaking landscape, the mindfulness practices, the unexpected connections with my fellow participants. She listened eagerly, occasionally interjecting with commentary about the wedding I'd missed. "Your cousin Taylor asked about you," she reported. I think she felt genuinely bad about the situation. "Oh, and your grandmother was amazing. She told everyone who asked that she was boycotting in solidarity with Brooke. Your mom looked like she'd swallowed a lemon every time." I smiled at the image of my fierce octogenarian grandmother making waves. And Ashley? Completely in her element. The perfect bride in her perfect wedding marrying her perfect husband. Zoe rolled her eyes. Although, there was this moment during the reception. I was getting a drink at the bar and I overheard her talking to one of her bridesmaids. She asked if they'd seen you post anything online about where you were. When they said no, she seemed, I don't know, deflated somehow? Like she'd been checking. I considered this information. Had Ashley expected me to publicly melt down? To post passive-aggressive comments about being excluded? The thought that I'd simply gone on with my life, finding joy elsewhere, had apparently not figured into her calculations. Back at my apartment, I unpacked slowly, integrating retreat items with my everyday life. The journal now half filled with insights, the smooth stone I'd carried on hikes, the handmade bracelet Amelia had given each of us during our farewell gathering. That evening, I posted a carefully curated selection of retreat photos on Instagram, stunning Sedona landscapes, a group shot of our retreat circle with faces joyful but serene, a beautiful image of my shadow stretching across red rocks at sunset. My caption was simple. Spent a transformative week at Peace Within Wellness Retreat in Sedona. Found connection, clarity, and yes, peace within. Sometimes the unexpected path leads exactly where you need to go. #authenticity, #healing, #self-discovery. I didn't directly reference the wedding or my exclusion from it. I didn't need to. The timing spoke volumes to anyone who knew the situation. The post received more engagement than anything I'd shared in years. Supportive comments poured in, many from acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in ages. Several people messaged privately to share their own family exclusion stories. A college friend even asked for the retreat information, saying she'd been considering something similar after her own family conflicts. My parents' reactions were predictably divided. My father texted a cautious, "Glad you had a good trip. We missed you." My mother called 3 times before leaving a voicemail that expertly blended guilt and curiosity. "The wedding was beautiful, but not the same without you. I hope this retreat thing gave you whatever you were looking for. Call me when you're ready to move past all this." I didn't call immediately. Instead, I spent the following days re-establishing my routine while integrating practices from the retreat. I started each morning with a short meditation. I took lunch breaks outside instead of at my desk. I scheduled regular video chats with Melissa and Tyler, who'd become unexpected friends. I began researching local support groups for neurodivergent adults. 5 days after the wedding, while I was shelving books at the university library, my phone buzzed with a text from Ashley. Our first communication since before the retreat. "Got back from honeymoon yesterday. Saw your retreat pictures. Looks nice. We should talk when things settle down." No apology. No acknowledgement of harm done. Just a casual message, as if she'd merely forgotten to include me on a dinner invitation rather than explicitly told me I was unfit to attend her wedding. I considered not responding at all, but Gabriella's voice echoed in my mind. Boundaries aren't about punishing others, they're about honoring yourself. So I replied simply, "I'm glad your wedding and honeymoon went well. I'm open to talking when you're ready to acknowledge what happened and how it affected me." 3 days of silence followed. Then, I said what I needed to say to protect my wedding day. "You're turning this into a bigger deal than it was. But if you need me to say sorry to move forward, then fine. I'm sorry you felt hurt." I actually laughed out loud in the middle of the reference section, earning a few curious glances from nearby students. The non-apology was so perfectly Ashley. Simultaneously dismissive and self-centered while couched as conciliation. This time, I didn't respond immediately. I sat with the message for a full day, consulting with my new therapist, another positive outcome of the retreat, about the healthiest way to engage. Finally, I wrote back, "I'm not looking for an apology that doesn't recognize the actual harm done. I'm setting a boundary that I'll only discuss moving forward when you're genuinely ready to talk about why telling someone they're socially unfit to attend a family event is deeply hurtful. I love you, Ashley, but I'm no longer willing to accept being treated as an embarrassment or inconvenience." Ashley's response was swift and defensive. This is exactly the kind of dramatic overreaction I was trying to avoid at the wedding. I put my phone away without responding further. The old Brooke would have engaged in this circular argument, desperate to make Ashley understand my perspective. The new Brooke recognized that wasn't my responsibility. I'd stated my boundary clearly. The ball was in her court. Meanwhile, my parents had begun their own awkward reconciliation attempts. My mother suggested Sunday dinner to catch up properly. My father sent an email asking if I'd like to attend a concert series we'd enjoyed together in previous summers. I accepted both invitations with clear parameters. "I'd love to come to dinner, but I need your assurance that we can have an honest conversation about recent events rather than pretending everything is fine. The concert sounds wonderful. I want to be clear that I'm still processing what happened with Ashley and the wedding, and I may need to talk about that with you at some point." Setting these boundaries felt simultaneously terrifying and liberating. Each time I advocated for my needs without apology, I was honoring the insights from the retreat, that my differences weren't character flaws, and that healthy relationships required mutual respect, not just tolerance. 3 weeks after returning from Sedona, I received an unexpected job offer from the university's Special Collections Department. The position involved less public-facing work and more cataloging and research. Tasks perfectly suited to my detail-oriented nature and preference for quieter environments. For the first time, I felt like my neurodivergent traits were being seen as potential assets rather than liabilities to be managed. That evening, I video chatted with the retreat group, who had maintained our connection through a private messaging thread. As I shared my news, their genuine celebration reminded me that authentic connection was possible with people who appreciated rather than merely tolerated my differences. The universe has interesting timing, Gabriella commented when I mentioned the job coinciding with all the family tension. How so? I asked. Sometimes we need to release what isn't serving us before we can receive what will help us thrive. As I prepared for the upcoming family dinner, the first time I would see my parents in person since before the wedding, I reflected on this wisdom. By setting boundaries around how I deserve to be treated, I was creating space for more authentic relationships, both within my family and beyond it. The journey was far from complete. There would be uncomfortable conversations ahead, potential setbacks, and certainly more learning. But for perhaps the first time in my life, I was approaching these challenges from a place of self-acceptance rather than self-doubt. I was socially different, not socially unfit. And that difference was no longer something I felt compelled to apologize for. The invitation to Sunday dinner came exactly 3 weeks after Ashley and Jackson returned from their honeymoon. My mother called personally, her voice carrying that careful neutrality that signaled she was trying very hard to pretend everything was normal. "We thought it would be nice to have a small family gathering," she said. "Just us, your father, Ashley, and Jackson. To reconnect." The old Brooke would have agreed immediately, desperate to smooth things over and regain family approval. The new Brooke took a deep breath and asked, "Will we be addressing what happened with the wedding, or is this meant to be a forget and move forward dinner?" The silence that followed told me my mother hadn't expected this directness. "Well, I think we all have things to discuss," she finally said. "But let's not make it confrontational, I agreed to come but spent the next 3 days preparing with my therapist, Dr. Winters. We role-played potential scenarios and practiced calm, clear statements I could use if conversations became defensive or dismissive. "Remember," Dr. Winters said during our session, "you can't control how they respond, only how you express yourself. Your goal isn't to make them admit they were wrong, it's to advocate for your needs moving forward." On Sunday afternoon, I stood in front of my closet, considering what to wear. For family gatherings in the past, I'd always chosen outfits that my mother deemed appropriate, subdued colors, conventional styles, nothing that would draw attention or comment. Today, I deliberately selected clothes that represented my authentic self. Comfortable dark jeans that didn't irritate my sensitive skin, a soft blue button-down that brought out my eyes, and my favorite handcrafted silver earrings from an artist I discovered in Sedona. I arrived at my parents' suburban home precisely on time, carrying a small potted succulent as a hostess gift, another Sedona influence. Taking a final centering breath in the car, I reminded myself that I was no longer seeking their approval. I was offering them the opportunity to connect with my true self. My father opened the door, his smile both genuine and nervous. "Kitten," he said, using my childhood nickname before catching himself. "Brooke, you look, well, the desert agreed with you." The house smelled of my mother's signature pot roast and lemon polish. Some things never changed. In the living room, my mother fussed with flower arrangements while Ashley and Jackson sat stiffly on the sofa, cocktails already in hand. The tableau was so perfectly composed it could have been a magazine spread on upper-middle-class family life. "Brooke," Ashley said, her tone measured as she stood to air-kiss my cheek. "Good to see you." Jackson nodded politely beside her. We'd met several times before, but I'd always sensed his discomfort around me. Today was no different. "Congratulations on your marriage," I said simply. "I hope the honeymoon was wonderful." My mother jumped in with excessive enthusiasm. "They went to the Maldives. The pictures are absolutely stunning. Ashley, show Brooke the sunset photos on that little island you visited." And so it began. The Mitchell family's specialty of speaking around difficult topics rather than addressing them directly. For the first 15 minutes, we performed this familiar dance, admiring honeymoon photos, discussing the unseasonably warm weather, my father explaining his new golf club membership. It was during the first lull in conversation, as my mother disappeared to check on dinner, that I decided to break the pattern. "I want to thank you all for inviting me today," I said calmly. "I know things have been tense since the wedding situation, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk in person." The room went silent. Ashley's posture stiffened. Jackson suddenly became very interested in his cocktail. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Brooke, perhaps we could just enjoy a nice family dinner without diving into all that right away," he suggested. I met his gaze steadily. "Dad, I came today specifically because I was told we would address what happened." "If that's not actually the plan, I should know now." My mother returned just in time to hear this exchange, her face tightening with anxiety. "Let's not create tension before we've even had dinner," she said, her laugh brittle. "Everything's ready, shall we move to the dining room?" I remained seated. "Mom, I understand this is uncomfortable, but pretending nothing happened isn't going to help us move forward as a family." I was explicitly uninvited from Ashley's wedding because I was deemed socially unfit. That hurt deeply, and ignoring it won't make it go away. Ashley sighed dramatically. "Here we go," she muttered to Jackson. "What does that mean, Ashley?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the anger flaring in my chest. "It means you're doing exactly what I was worried about, making everything about your feelings and your needs, just like always." Before I could respond, Jackson stood abruptly. "I think I'll help Karen in the kitchen," he said, making a hasty exit. My father looked torn between following him and mediating the brewing confrontation. He chose an uncomfortable middle ground, perching on the edge of his armchair like he might need to intervene physically. "Ashley," I said after taking a steadying breath, "I understand the wedding was your day. What I don't understand is why my presence would have been so detrimental that excluding me entirely seemed like the only option." "You know how you get," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "You get overwhelmed, you disappear for breaks, you say inappropriate things without realizing it. Jackson's family is extremely traditional and influential. I couldn't risk any incidents." "Incidents," I repeated. "You mean me being myself?" "I mean you being difficult," she countered. "And look how you're proving my point right now, making this huge dramatic scene instead of just letting us have a nice family dinner. Is asking to discuss a significant family conflict really making a huge dramatic scene?" I asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like a reasonable adult conversation. My mother reappeared in the doorway. "Dinner's getting cold," she announced with forced cheerfulness. "Let's table this discussion for now, shall we?" "No," I said quietly but firmly. "I need to say something first." All eyes turned to me, expressions ranging from exasperation to apprehension. I spent years believing something was fundamentally wrong with me because that's what this family consistently communicated. But I've realized that I'm not defective, I'm different. My brain works differently. I process sensory information differently. I communicate differently. And those differences are not character flaws or personal failings. I paused, noting with surprise that everyone was actually listening. Being excluded from Ashley's wedding hurt terribly. But it also forced me to confront how I've allowed myself to be defined by your perceptions rather than my own self-knowledge. I went to Sedona not to spite anyone, but to heal. And I did. I connected with people who value me exactly as I am. I learned tools to navigate a world that isn't designed for minds like mine. I discovered that I don't have to constantly apologize for existing in my authentic way. My father was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, something between surprise and perhaps a hint of pride. My mother looked pained but attentive. Ashley's face remained carefully neutral. "I'm not here to demand apologies or assign blame," I continued. "I'm here because despite everything, I love this family and hope we can build healthier relationships moving forward. But that can only happen if we're honest about where we've been." When I finished speaking, the silence that followed felt different from the tense, awkward pauses that usually punctuated our family conflicts. This silence had a quality of absorption, as if my words were actually being considered rather than merely endured. Finally, my father spoke. "Brooke, I think we haven't always understood you very well. And maybe we haven't tried hard enough to." My mother dabbed at her eyes with a cocktail napkin. "We just wanted you to fit in, to have an easier life. Maybe we focused too much on changing you instead of accepting you." Their words weren't perfect, but they were perhaps the most honest acknowledgement I'd ever received from them. Ashley remained silent, her expression complex. When she finally spoke, her voice lacked its usual defensive edge. "I was under so much pressure," she said quietly. "The Lewises had expectations. Jackson's mother was micromanaging everything. I was trying to create this perfect day, and I think I scapegoated you. It was easier to exclude you than to stand up to everyone else's expectations." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was the closest thing to vulnerability I'd heard from my sister in years. "Thank you for being honest," I said. "That helps me understand better." My mother, ever practical, seized the moment of decreased tension. "Now, can we please eat before everything is completely ruined?" The dinner that followed wasn't magical. Conversations still occasionally veered into uncomfortable territory. Ashley still made a few comments that revealed how far we had to go. But there was also a new quality to our interactions, a tentative authenticity that had been missing for as long as I could remember. When Jackson asked about my retreat experience, seemingly genuinely curious, I described the red rock formations and meditation practices without filtering or downplaying my enthusiasm. When my mother mentioned a neighbor's daughter who was having similar issues, I gently corrected her terminology rather than letting it pass to avoid conflict. As the evening drew to a close, I declined my parents' invitation to stay for dessert, explaining that I needed to decompress after the emotional conversation, a boundary I would have previously been too anxious to set. "I'd like to do this again," I said at the door. "Maybe next time we could try an activity that doesn't involve sitting and making conversation the entire time. I've learned that I connect better with people when we're doing something side by side." My father nodded thoughtfully. "There's a new botanical garden exhibit I've been wanting to see. Maybe next weekend?" The suggestion, so considerate of my preferences, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "I'd like that very much." In the months that followed, our family relationships evolved gradually. There were setbacks and old patterns that emerged under stress. My mother still occasionally sent me articles about overcoming social anxiety that missed the point entirely. My father still sometimes shushed me when my directness made others uncomfortable. Ashley and I maintained a more distant relationship than before, though with greater honesty in our limited interactions. But there were also meaningful changes. My parents made efforts to create more sensory-friendly family gatherings. My father began asking questions about my experience rather than assuming he understood it. My mother, in her own way, became somewhat protective of me in extended family settings. Meanwhile, my own life flourished in unexpected directions. The retreat friendships deepened, with Melissa and Tyler becoming regular fixtures in my life. The special collections position at the university leveraged my natural strengths and accommodated my sensory needs. I even began a small volunteer role at a local organization supporting neurodivergent youth, sharing insights from my own journey. 6 months after the wedding, Ashley called to tell me she was pregnant. After the initial congratulations, she said something that genuinely surprised me. "I've been thinking," she said hesitantly, "about how I want to raise this child. And I don't want them to ever feel the way you felt growing up, like there was something wrong with them for being who they are." It wasn't a full reckoning with the past, but it was perhaps the beginning of one. As I reflect on the journey from exclusion to self-acceptance, I realize that Ashley's cruel text ultimately gave me an unexpected gift. Being labeled socially unfit forced me to confront the ways I'd internalized others' perceptions. The peace I found wasn't despite the rejection, but because of how it pushed me to seek healing on my own terms. I still have days when social situations overwhelm me. I still sometimes say things too directly or miss subtle cues. I still need breaks and quiet spaces and understanding. The difference is that I no longer see these needs as flaws to apologize for, but simply as aspects of who I am, a unique, We're the individual who experiences the world in her own valid way. If you've ever felt excluded for being different, please know that there's nothing wrong with you. The right people will value your authentic self, not despite your differences, but because of the perspective and depth they bring. You aren't socially unfit, you're uniquely fitted for connections that honor your true nature. I'd love to hear your stories of finding acceptance, whether from others or within yourself. Drop them in the comments below, and please like and subscribe if this journey resonated with you. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that their differences are not defects. Thank you for witnessing my story, and remember that sometimes the path to peace begins with the courage to be exactly who you are.